Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The storm had been crawling across the sky since morning, a heavy-bellied thing dragging its weight over the treetops, grumbling softly to itself. By the time night fell, the rain was a steady, rhythmic hush that soaked the pines and pattered on the tin roof of the old ranger's cabin. The world outside was swallowed in shadow and sound, and the forest no longer looked like a place that had paths or rules. It was something older now. Hungrier. Elias set another log onto the fire and watched it catch, the flames curling up around the bark, hissing where raindrops still clung. The room flickered with amber light, and the windows were streaked with rivulets of water, making it hard to see the dark trees outside. But he didn't want to see out there. Not anymore. The air smelled like damp wood, smoke, and something else he couldn't quite name. Not rot. Not mildew. Just something wrong. It had started the night before, a bitter tang that drifted in with the fog, prickling the back of his throat like burnt copper. He hadn't planned to be out here this long. The trip was supposed to be 2 nights, a solo retreat into the woods to clear his head, maybe jot down notes for his next piece. But the river flooded during the first night's storm, washing out the old footbridge and stranding him on this side. The ranger station hadn't been used in years, but it still had dry wood, a working fireplace, and a thick door with a bolt. That should have made him feel safe. It didn't. Not after what he heard last night. It had started as a low tapping. Soft, deliberate. He'd thought it was the wind at first, but it had rhythm, a beat that repeated every few seconds. Tap. 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 Like fingernails on wood. It circled the cabin. Once. Twice. Then nothing. He hadn't opened the door. Not even when something whispered through the keyhole. Now, the fire cracked and spit, and Elia jumped. His nerves were raw, and the room suddenly felt too big, the shadows too deep. He sat back in the worn chair, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders, listening to the wind press against the walls like something breathing. The rain seemed louder now. Or maybe something was moving between the trees. He glanced toward the window. A shape. A flash. Gone. His heart stuttered. No. It was nothing. Just the storm playing tricks. His imagination was always too vivid, that's what people told him. Even as a child, he saw things in the corners of the room, heard footsteps behind doors that should have been empty. He had chalked it up to an overactive mind. But now, alone in the woods with no cell service, no way back until the river dropped, now, he wasn't so sure. He stood and paced. The floorboards creaked under his boots, and the wind howled around the edges of the roof. Thunder rolled far off in the valley, and something deep inside the forest echoed it, not thunder, not quite. It was lower. More organic. A groan or a growl. Long lingering. Like a sound made not just with lungs but with the earth itself. Elia backed toward the fireplace. The warmth didn't help. He turned toward the narrow hallway that led to the supply room, thinking of grabbing another blanket or maybe the old flare gun he'd seen in one of the drawers. That's when he heard it again. Tap. 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 Not outside. Inside. From the back room. He froze, every hair on his body lifting, his breath trapped just behind his teeth. The fire popped, and the tapping stopped. He waited. A slow creak broke the silence. The sound of a door moving. The back room. But he'd locked it. He was sure of it. He had to be sure. Then, from deep inside that hallway, came a voice rasping, close, as though pressed just beneath the floorboards. "Why did you come back?" Elijah didn't move. The voice, if it had truly been a voice, was low and coarse, the kind that scraped at the ears and left a mark. It hadn't sounded angry or urgent. Just disappointed. Hollow. Like it was speaking through soil. He stared down the dark hallway. The narrow corridor extended from the main room, vanishing into a black square where the supply room sat at the back of the cabin. The door at the end was slightly ajar. He could just barely make out the edge of it, where it swayed on its hinges slowly, silently. His legs wanted to move. Run, maybe. Throw the bolt on the front door and charge into the rain-drenched night. But the rest of him, the part that had heard the voice with awful clarity, knew that whatever had spoken was not out there. It was in here. The fire behind him flared, sending a burst of light and heat toward the hallway. For the briefest moment, the far door lit up. He saw what looked like a shadow flicker past it. Not cross it, pass behind it. As if the space beyond had more room than the cabin's floor plan allowed. He stepped back. Slowly. 1 foot at a time. His boot caught on a warped floorboard, and the dull thud of his stumble echoed too loud in the small room. Silence answered. Even the rain seemed to hush for a heartbeat. Then something inside the back room began to scratch. A long, dry scrape, like claws raking against stone. It moved from the floor to the wall, then higher, crawling up into the ceiling. Above him. He looked up. The ceiling of the cabin was exposed with beams blackened by time, old spider webs gathered in corners. He had examined it the night before while lying on the couch, listening to the wind. There were no attic panels, no crawl spaces. Just rafters. And yet, something shifted up there now. Weight. Something with weight was moving above the ceiling. Boards creaked, groaned. Then, as if a sudden thought tore through his spine, Elijah lunged to the fireplace and grabbed the old iron poker. It wasn't much, but it had weight and a sharp, blackened tip. His breath came fast now, and his heartbeat sounded like footsteps echoing inside his own chest. Above, the movement stilled. He waited, sweat prickling his back despite the chill. His eyes flicked toward the hallway again. The door was now fully open. He hadn't heard it move. There was something unnatural about the darkness in that room, not just the absence of light, but a thickness to it, like ink spilled in water. It didn't let the light from the fire penetrate. It swallowed it. Elijah whispered to himself, "It's just a storm. Just nerves. Just..." A voice cut him off, from inside the back room. This time it was different. This time it was his own voice. Elijah. A perfect mimicry. His name, spoken with the same cadence he used when leaving voicemails. No malice. Just inviting. Then again. Elijah. Closer now. The hallway light blinked just once. As if a cloud passed over the moon, but there was no moonlight. No electricity either. He backed toward the door, gripping the poker. He could hear the wind outside, and even the sound of the river still raging in the distance. The world beyond was cold and real. But stepping into it meant stepping away from the fire, and for reasons he couldn't quite name, Elijah knew that the fire mattered. Not just for heat, but for keeping things away. Elijah. The third whisper slid from the walls themselves. It didn't come from the back room. It came from all around him, and for a moment, the wooden floor beneath his boots felt soft, as if the boards were no longer dry timber, but something else. Something alive. He dropped the poker. No reason. His hands just let go. It hit the floor with a clang and rolled to the hearth. His legs moved, unbidden, toward the hallway. The whisper became softer, almost tender. It drew him like a lullaby. And then, in the corner of his vision, he saw a figure. At first it was only the faintest distortion, like heat rising above asphalt, a shimmer against the dark. But as his eyes adjusted, it took shape, a figure tall and thin, standing at the end of the hall just beyond the door. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted slightly. No eyes. No face. It opened its arms. Elijah. He couldn't breathe. And then, the fire roared behind him. A sudden gust, like bellows blown by an unseen hand, sent sparks upward and out. The flames surged tall, furious, crackling against the air. The light spilled across the room like a wave, splashing into the hallway. And the figure vanished. Elijah stumbled back. His chest heaved, his skin clammy. He nearly slipped as he turned and pressed his back to the cabin door, keeping the fire in his line of sight. The poker still lay at the hearth. The hallway was quiet again. But the shadows hadn't retreated. They crouched just out of reach of the firelight. Watching. Waiting. He didn't sleep that night. Not even when the rain softened and the wind quieted. Not even when the pale gray of dawn seeped between the slats of the boarded-up window. Something had changed in the cabin. It had always felt old, but now it felt occupied. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, the question kept returning. Why did you come back? Because this wasn't his first time here. No. Something was waiting for him. And it remembered him. The morning came with no birdsong. Even as the gray light filtered through the rain-drenched pine canopy, everything in the forest remained unnaturally still. The wind had died sometime before dawn, and the rain had become a faint mist, just a quiet sheen that hung in the air like breath on cold glass. But not a single bird called. Not a single branch cracked under movement. It was a silence that felt purposeful, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Elijah sat near the fire, blanket pulled tight around his shoulders, watching the embers pulse in the hearth. He had fed it throughout the night, never letting the flame die. Not even for a minute. The poker rested nearby, its end now glowing red from being left too close to the coals. His eyes were dry. He hadn't blinked much. Every time he did, he saw it again, the figure in the hallway, arms open, faceless, waiting. And that voice. His voice. Hollowed out and wronged. The back hallway still sat in shadow. The door at the end, the one that had once led to the old supply room, was still open. But now something was different. The wall beside it looked off. As if the grain in the wood didn't quite match the rest of the cabin. It looked newer. Too clean. Like someone had recently replaced the paneling there. He stood, legs stiff, and approached cautiously. There was no sound. No whisper. No creak. But as he got closer, he saw it, a door. No handle. No hinges. No latch. Just a narrow rectangle cut into the wood, outlined by hair-thin gaps in the wall. The door was flush with the surrounding timber, camouflaged so seamlessly that anyone not specifically looking for it would miss it entirely. Elijah had never noticed it before. It hadn't been there yesterday. He reached out and ran a finger along its edge. The wood was cold. Colder than it should have been, considering the fireplace just 30 feet away. And damp. Not wet from rain, but from something deeper. Like the moisture of earth long buried. It reminded him of a root cellar door, the kind you'd find in old farmhouses, leading down to stone steps and soil. But this was inside the cabin. Built into the wall. Vertical. He gave it a light push. Nothing. No movement, no sound. He pressed harder, leaning in with his shoulder. Still nothing. Then he placed his ear against it. Silence. No, not quite silence. A hum. Very faint. Like distant machinery, or the murmur of many voices speaking too far away to understand. It seemed to come from beyond the door, and it vibrated faintly against his cheek. When he pulled away, the sound lingered in his ear like the aftertaste of a thought. He backed away and returned to the fire. The cabin was cold again, despite the coals. That door, it hadn't always been there. He would have seen it on the first night, or during his pacing the night before. And yet now, in the pale hours of morning, it was as plain as anything. Like it had emerged during the night, rising up through the wood like a splinter being pushed from under skin. The river. That was the way out. If it had dropped overnight, he could make a break for it. There was an old footpath that curved along the cliffside, precarious but usable. It led down to the lower bend, where the ranger's tower had once stood. From there, cell signal might return. He didn't need to stay here. Not another night. Not with that door. Elijah dressed fast, layered clothes damp from being hung too close to the chimney. His boots squelched slightly as he shoved his feet in. The flashlight was already dead. He grabbed the flare gun from the drawer, checked it was loaded, then stuffed it into his coat. No phone. No radio. He paused only once, looking back at the strange door. His breath fogged lightly in the air. That part of the cabin was colder now than it had been the night before. He stepped outside. The forest greeted him with its silence. Rain misted from above, barely audible, and the pine trees stood like sentinels, unmoving, too tall, too watchful. Every trunk seemed darker than before, not from water, but from shadow, like the light didn't quite touch them anymore. Elijah followed the muddy path behind the cabin, pushing through the underbrush. The moss was slick, and roots jutted from the ground like bones. The air smelled like pine and mold and something else, something faintly metallic. Like the inside of a drained animal. As he reached the ridge where the river should have been visible below, his stomach sank. The water hadn't receded. It had risen. The entire bend was submerged, the current wild and white. Chunks of earth had fallen into the torrent, and what was left of the old footpath had collapsed entirely. The lower trail was gone. Washed into the black churning water. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned and looked back toward the trees. Somewhere beyond them was the cabin. But it no longer felt like it was behind him. It felt like it was watching him from within the forest. As if the walls and doors and roof had dissolved into the trees, become part of the landscape. Like the structure itself had stretched outward while he walked, roots unfurling under pine needles, beams becoming limbs, shadows becoming eyes. He shook the thought off and began the slow walk back. But he took a different route, looping around the clearing, avoiding the direct path, thinking that maybe if he came at the cabin from another side, it might look normal again. It was a foolish hope, but it was all he had. That's when he saw the girl. She stood by the edge of the trees, maybe 40 feet away, her back to him. Her dress was too thin for the weather, something light, once white, now stained with streaks of mud and moss. Her hair was dark, dripping with rain. She didn't shiver. Elijah froze. "Hey," he called gently. "Are you okay?" She didn't move. "Do you need help?" Still nothing. No twitch. No tilt of the head. He took a step closer. Then another. The air between them felt thick, like walking through oil. She raised her hand. Slowly. Pointed. Not at him. at the cabin behind the trees. Then she spoke, but her lips didn't move. Her voice was inside his head. "You should not have opened the door." He blinked, and she was gone. Vanished. No footprints in the wet moss. No rustle of leaves. Just trees and rain and the hush of a forest that no longer pretended to be empty. Elias stumbled back toward the clearing, his heart thudding. The fire inside the cabin was still burning. He could see the faint orange glow through the window. But when he returned to the porch, the front door was already open. And the air smelled like damp soil. Like a grave just unearthed. Like something hungry waiting just out of sight. The door should not have been open. Elias stared at it from just beyond the threshold. The rain mist slicked his coat, beads of water gathering at his collar and dripping onto the worn wooden porch. From here, the interior of the cabin was cloaked in flickering orange, the firelight still alive in the hearth. But something had shifted. The warmth that should have been spilling outward onto the porch felt choked. The air inside had gone still, not dead, exactly, but expectant. As if the house was holding its breath. He stepped forward, slowly, stepping over the threshold with the kind of reverence one might reserve for entering a church after hours, when no one else was around and even the air felt sacred. The fire crackled. The logs hadn't burned down much, but the flames were thin now, weak, curling like nervous fingers. As he shut the door behind him, Elias noticed that the shadows didn't retreat from the firelight the way they had before. They drew closer. The hallway to the back was darker than ever. The narrow wall seemed tighter somehow, the wood grain now warped into subtle spirals, like something had pushed outward from behind the surface. The strange door, the one with no latch, was still there. Still shut. And the hearth. Elias' gaze drifted to the stone base beneath the fire. The hearth had always seemed solid. Made from local fieldstone, it was old but dependable, bearing the weight of generations of warmth. But now, the stones looked off. One of the central pieces near the base had shifted. Not much. Barely noticeable. But it had moved. He stepped closer and knelt beside it, the warmth of the fire brushing his face. That stone wasn't aligned with the others anymore. It jutted slightly outward, its edges now revealing a sliver of darkness beneath the hearth. A gap. He picked up the iron poker, still warm at the handle, and tapped at the stone. Hollow. There was space underneath. He froze. Part of him wanted to step back, to let it be. Just cover it with ash and pretend he never noticed. But curiosity is a form of gravity. And Elias had always been susceptible. He grabbed the edge of the stone and pulled. It groaned but gave way. A puff of dust erupted from the crack, dry and bitter. He set the stone aside and peered into the space. Beneath the hearth was a small cavity, maybe 2 feet deep and wide, like a burrow dug into the earth. The walls were made of rough soil and old root tendrils. And in the center of it, cradled in dark, dry ash, was an object. A box. It was wooden, old and cracked, covered in moldy cloth that had once been tied in a neat knot. The fabric looked hand-woven, something old-fashioned, too delicate for this part of the world. It was damp to the touch, as if the earth had sweated around it. Elias lifted it out and immediately felt a weight that didn't match its size. The thing was heavy, far heavier than it should have been, not just in mass, but in presence. It felt wrong in his hands, like holding a thought someone had buried and forgotten on purpose. He set it on the floorboards by the fire. The cabin creaked above him. No, not the cabin. The ceiling. Directly overhead. He looked up, heart hammering. Above the hearth was a narrow strip of planks. One of them, dead center, was bowed inward slightly. The same one that had groaned last night when he heard the weight overhead. A small clump of dust dropped from the board, drifting lazily through the air. Elijah swallowed hard and turned his attention back to the box. The knot in the cloth had already come undone, though he swore he hadn't touched it. The fabric parted like old petals, revealing a lid that was slightly ajar. He hesitated, then opened it fully. Inside, resting on layers of brittle straw and earth, were two things: a human tooth, and a small, childlike wooden carving of a figure with no face. The figure had arms carved across its chest, as if hugging itself. Its feet were rooted, literally, instead of legs. The base tapered into a split root system, the kind you'd see from a sapling half exposed to the air. Someone had painted its surface with faint, faded symbols, circles, thorns, and one jagged mark that looked almost like an open eye. As Elijah stared, the fire behind him hissed, flaring for a brief moment. The air grew dense, metallic. Then the floor beneath the hearth creaked. Not just a settling of wood, but a shift, as though something deep beneath the foundation had adjusted its position. Elijah backed away, box in hand. Then, tap, 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 from the back hallway. But it wasn't the tapping from before, not knuckles or claws. It was footsteps. Bare footsteps. Slow. Wet. Approaching. He couldn't breathe. His body screamed to run, to bolt into the storm, to throw the box into the fire and forget all of it. But his feet held, rooted like the carving in his hand. The footsteps reached the end of the hallway. Stopped. He didn't look. He couldn't. Instead, he turned the wooden figure upside down. Carved into its back, almost too small to notice, was a single word. A name. Elijah. The fire behind him guttered, suddenly low. In the cold darkness of the cabin, a voice whispered, so close it touched the skin of his ear. You left something behind. He turned slowly, against all instinct, and stared into the hallway. There was no one there. But the floor was wet with footprints, leading away from the hearth, into the room with the door that had no latch. And the door? It was now open. The open door at the end of the hall pulsed with darkness. It was no longer simply an absence of light, not merely the hollow beyond a threshold. Now it breathed. With every second, Elijah could feel it tugging faintly at the air around him, like the slow, measured inhale of something that had just woken from a long, uneasy sleep. The footprints on the wooden floor, bare, slick, the size of a child's, trailed across the cabin and vanished through that doorway. Where the wood met the threshold, it looked damp. Not from rain or tracked in mud. This was something else. Something deep. The small wooden figure still sat in his hand. He stared at it again, turning it slowly, feeling the strange warmth it seemed to carry despite the chill in the room. The carved name Elijah was still etched into its back, unmistakable. No tricks of shadow, no imagined coincidence. It was his name. Not just his first name. The unique spelling. The one his mother had insisted on, with the extra H no one ever pronounced. No one outside his family would have known that. Certainly no one who had been in this cabin before. He set the box and figure on the table and stepped closer to the hallway. Each footfall echoed louder than it should have. The boards creaked not just beneath his weight, but somewhere deeper, as if their groans were being answered from the crawlspace of the forest itself. Somewhere below. The open door waited. No handle. No lock. No signs of wear. Just a rectangular aperture carved into the timber, impossibly seamless, revealing a set of stairs leading downward where no stairs should have existed. Elijah paused at the top. The air drifting up from below was wrong. Cold in a way that wasn't just temperature, it was empty. The sort of cold that sucked sound from the air and made the skin feel thinner. The kind of cold that made the bones remember something the mind had forgotten. He raised the flare gun and aimed it downward. The stairs were made of stone. Not rough-cut timber or concrete. Stone. Old and uneven, worn from use. They descended into an earthen tunnel, the walls lined with tangled roots that protruded like the ribs of some vast, buried creature. Water glistened on the walls, and the faint sound of dripping echoed from somewhere far below. He took a breath. Then stepped down. One step. Then another. The door behind him whispered shut. Not slammed. Not clicked. Just closed, as if on a gentle breeze. The firelight vanished. Only the dim, reddish glow of the flare gun's plastic casing illuminated his path now. But it was enough to see the walls. The roots weren't just growing into the stone, they wrapped around it. Some of them had the pale hue of bone. Others were a dark, tarry black. One of them twitched as he passed, curling slightly away from his boot. Elijah ignored it. Downward he went. 20 steps. 40. There was no sense of distance. The air thickened as he descended, each breath dragging like wet cloth through his throat. The walls began to curve slightly, the tunnel no longer straight but bending in slow, imperceptible spirals, as if the deeper he went, the more reality unwound. Then, at last, a room. He stepped into it without thinking. It was a chamber. Circular. 30 feet across. The walls were entirely root-bound, woven tight like basketry, but smoother almost like the inside of a shell. And in the center, a pool. Not water. Not oil. Something between. The surface was matte, too still, with a faintly mirrored sheen like obsidian or polished clay. Suspended just above it, not touching, but hovering perhaps a foot off the surface, was a shape. A human shape. It floated there, motionless. Limbs stretched slightly outward, as if it had simply been set there by invisible strings. Its skin was dark with soil and cracked in places. Its hair hung in matted cords down the back. The face was turned away, but Elijah knew, before it even turned, that the figure would have no eyes. And when it did slowly rotate toward him, pivoting not by gravity or breath, but by some unseen force, he was proven right. It had no eyes. Just skin. Smooth and pale over the sockets. Its mouth opened. And out poured a sound. Not speech. A low, warbling hum that made the walls vibrate. The pool below it rippled. The roots around the chamber tightened, some of them splitting slightly to reveal wet, pulsing veins within. The hum climbed in pitch, not in volume, until it settled just above the edge of hearing, a frequency that made the back of Elijah's skull throb. He raised the flare gun, trembling. The figure tilted its head. Then it spoke. But not aloud. The words arrived in Elijah's mind, not as thoughts but as invasions. Like stones tossed into still water, the language sank and spread ripples through his consciousness. You were carried here once, screaming into soil. The voice, if it could be called that, was dry and ancient and heavy. It pulled memories from places he had never looked. You do not remember your first ascent, but your roots do. Elijah staggered back a step. You broke the circle when you fled the first time. Now it must be mended. The figure remembers your shape. The floating body moved closer. It didn't drift, it slid, as if pulled by magnetism. Its feet still hovered. Its arms extended. A hand reached out. Elijah fired the flare gun. The chamber lit with red fire and smoke. The flare hit the body square in the chest and exploded in a blossom of furious light, smoke, and heat. The sound was thunder in the root-buried tomb. The figure spasmed, convulsing in air, but didn't fall. The flame clung to it, dancing over its chest and limbs, revealing scars carved into its skin. Symbols, circles, eyes, thorny spirals, the same as those on the wooden carving upstairs. The chamber screamed. Not the figure, the chamber itself. The roots writhed. The walls contracted. Soil rained from the ceiling. Something deep beneath the pool shifted, like a mountain turning in its sleep. Elijah turned and ran. Up the steps. 2 at a time. He slipped on moss, blood, roots. His legs screamed. His throat burned. The stairwell groaned and pulsed, roots reaching for him, trying to tangle around his feet. One brushed his ankle, cold and slick, but he kicked free. He burst through the door, slamming into the hallway, back into the cabin. The fire had died. Everything was dark. But now, something was upstairs. He could hear it. Walking. Dragging. As if whatever had floated in that chamber had returned before him and was waiting above. Waiting in the attic. And above the fireplace, one of the ceiling boards had fallen open. Just wide enough for someone or something to crawl through. Elijah stared up at the ceiling. The board above the hearth had broken cleanly along its edges, leaving a square hole in the wood just large enough to fit a body through. The edges were lined with splinters, and above it was only darkness, not the kind of empty black you expect in an attic, but the kind that listens. A void that felt less like a space and more like an eye. And something up there had moved. He could still hear it, soft shuffles, faint wood creaks, the sigh of something shifting weight. Not frantic. Not hurried. Just slow and deliberate, as if whatever occupied the attic had nowhere to be but here. He backed away from the hearth, heart hammering in his chest. The flare gun in his hand was empty now, spent, the barrel still warm and useless. He dropped it without meaning to, the clatter muffled by the thickness of the cabin silence. A faint drop of something dark and thick splashed onto the hearthstone. He looked up. A line of liquid had begun to form along the edge of the attic hole, creeping downward like oil. Not water. Not sap. Something black and viscous, and it smelled faintly of iron and earth. Like blood left too long in the soil. He stepped further back, eyes locked on the opening. And then... thump. A heavy drop. Not the fluid, something solid. It hit the floor above. Then again. A dragging noise. A low, wet smear. Like someone pulling a heavy sack across floorboards. He clenched his jaw. Then came the whisper. From the attic. Soft. Croaking. And far too close. You never buried me. Elijah's knees nearly gave out. The voice was wrong, not just eerie or unfamiliar. It was known. Old. Intimate. It was his brother's voice. No. No, it couldn't be. He hadn't heard that voice in years. Not since. But he didn't want to remember. The past came rushing like floodwater, cold and loud and unstoppable. He was 13 again. Back in the farmhouse where they grew up, 100 miles from here. The night Jonah vanished. The police said he must have wandered into the woods during the storm. That maybe he'd drowned in the old well, or gotten lost in the nearby pine grove. But they never found a body. Elijah had seen something that night. A shape near the tree line. A door in the ground that hadn't been there before. But he had told no one. Not then. Not ever. He had run. just like he'd run now. And now the voice was here. He was here. And he remembered. You saw me, and you left me. The attic groaned again. A shape now began to emerge from the square hole above the hearth. First, two pale hands, too thin, fingers long and damp, gripping the edges of the wood with a sound like suction. Then the head, matted hair, skin stretched too tight across the skull, eyes that were only sockets, black and sunken. But the mouth. The mouth smiled. Crooked. Familiar. Jonah. Elijah turned and bolted, crashing into the hallway, nearly slipping on the floorboards still wet from the footprints. He didn't look back. Not this time. He moved by instinct, shoving open the back door that led into the woods, out into the cold drizzle. But the forest had changed. Where there had been trees and moss and the slope toward the river, there was now fog. A thick, choking gray that stretched in every direction. Trees still stood, but they were twisted now, their bark peeling like old skin, their branches reaching down instead of up. He turned left, then right, stumbling through the shifting mist, the cabin vanishing behind him faster than it should have. Roots curled across the ground like veins. The forest felt less like a place and more like a body. And something was calling to him. Not in words, but in pressure. A pull in the center of his chest, guiding him deeper into the fog. And at the heart of it, he knew without knowing, was a memory. One he had buried. He broke into a clearing. It was small. Circular. The ground was bare, stripped of moss or leaves, just raw dirt and exposed roots. In the center stood a stone, flat, worn, moss-covered. A marker. Not a grave. A seal. The fog parted above it, revealing a narrow shaft of gray sky. Elijah approached, his breath ragged, his limbs trembling. As he drew near the stone, the air grew impossibly still. The earth hummed. He knelt and touched the surface. It was warm. Faintly. Like something beneath it was breathing. He brushed away moss, revealing lines, carvings long eroded. Circles. Spirals. A jagged symbol like an open eye. The same as the figure. The same as the chamber. And then he heard the voice again. Not Jonah this time. This voice was deeper. Older. All around him. What you bury in the forest never stays buried. The stone shuddered. Then cracked. A hairline fracture formed from the center outward, splitting the seal. The roots around the edge began to twitch. Writhing. Pulling away from the ground like something inside was pushing upward. And from below, deep, deep below, came a sound. A slow, rhythmic beating. Like a heart. Huge. Alive. Waiting. The seal split down the center. A rush of black air spilled upward, cold and sharp and wet with the stink of old rot. Elijah staggered back. And from the split in the earth, a single, pale hand emerged. It was not Jonah's. It was not human. Its skin was bark-like, grown over with moss and veins. Its fingers ended in narrow tips like splintered wood. And as it touched the surface of the stone, the sky overhead darkened, the fog twisting upward into a column that blotted out all light. From behind him, footsteps. He turned. Jonah stood there. But not as he had been. His body was split down the center, one half rotten and hollow, the other stiff like wood. His face was a mess of scars and age, far too old for the years past. And he smiled. I brought you back. Elijah couldn't move. Jonah stepped closer. Now you'll finish what we started. The hand beneath the seal gripped the edge of the stone and began to rise. and with it came a shape. Vast. Not just a body. A presence. Something with roots that ran deeper than any tree. Something with memory. With hunger. With intention. The forest trembled. The sky turned to night. And in that final moment, as the ground began to open, Elijah saw a face forming in the soil. His own. Eyes closed. Waiting to wake. The face in the soil was his. Not a vague resemblance. Not a dream memory stitched into shadow. It was Elijah's same jaw, same brow, same thin scar beneath the eye he'd gotten at age 10 falling from a neighbor's fence. The details were precise, impossibly so, as if the forest had not simply mimicked him but absorbed him. Its eyes were closed, but even in stillness, there was weight. A breath held. A dream unfinished. And beneath that face, the soil pulsed. Roots swam just under the surface, coiling like veins, glowing faintly with a sickly green-white light. They pulsed in time with that deep, low heartbeat that seemed to echo from the center of the forest. A rhythm older than footsteps. Older than language. Jonah stood at the edge of the cracked seal, arms slightly raised, head tilted toward the pulsing earth. His face was serene, wrapped with the reverence of a man in worship. He seemed younger now, not in years, but in weight. The gauntness was fading from his cheeks. His spine stood straighter. Elijah wanted to speak, to scream, to demand answers, but his throat was locked. The roots surrounding the clearing were curling upward now, stretching like fingers, drawing inward in slow, twitching motions. As if the earth was tightening. Drawing breath. He took a step back. Jonah turned toward him, smile calm. "You always thought you ran," he said, voice smooth, lacking the strange echo from before. "But this place doesn't let anything leave." "Not really." He gestured to the carved stone that had once sealed the pit. "You can't run from where you're planted." Elijah shook his head. "No," he managed, voice hoarse. "You're dead." I saw them search." "I searched." Jonah stepped closer. "They searched above ground." He smiled wider. "But they didn't listen." The roots around Elijah's feet shifted, curling inward, lightly brushing his boots like curious fingers. Jonah crouched near the now fully exposed hole in the ground. The hand that had emerged, that inhuman, barkskin limb, was gone now, pulled back into the dark. But the space remained. Open. A perfect vertical shaft disappearing into pure black. Elijah could hear something below. Not breathing. Not speaking. But shifting. Jonah reached into his coat and removed something. A doll. Small, crude, carved from wood. It looked exactly like the one Elijah had found in the box beneath the hearth. Same blank face, same carved symbols. But this one bore Jonah's name. He held it reverently, then tossed it into the open pit. There was no sound when it landed. No echo. Just an absence. Jonah turned his gaze upward, toward the gnarled trees. "Elijah," he said softly, "there are things down there that remember the shapes we wore. The names we had. The roots we abandoned." Elijah could barely hear his own breath. "What are you?" he asked. Jonah smiled. This time, sadly. "I'm still me," he said. "But I'm also something else now. Something older. Something that grew from what was left behind." His eyes gleamed with unnatural light. "And you're still unfinished." Elijah's stomach twisted. The trees surrounding the clearing had begun to lean. Not physically, their trunks hadn't moved, but the sensation was there. As though the entire forest was bending its attention toward this place, this moment. listening, waiting. Jonah stood. "I didn't call you here to punish you," he said. "I called you to finish the planting." He gestured to the earth, to the cracked seal, the roots, the pulsing shape that had his face. "You were buried wrong. Half of you stayed. Half of you left." He pointed to Eliah's chest. "That's why you've never belonged anywhere. Why the dreams never stopped." Eliah's mind reeled. He thought of the migraines, the sleepwalking, the hollow stretches of time lost in the middle of the day, the dreams of roots strangling his arms, the sound of breathing beneath the floorboards of every apartment he'd ever rented. Jonah stepped closer. "There's only one way to fix it." And before Eliah could react, Jonah reached forward and pressed his hand to Eliah's chest. The world tilted. Sudden, blinding cold exploded through his ribs and spine. He tried to scream, but the sound stuck in his throat. His eyes rolled back as pressure bloomed beneath his skin, not pain, exactly, but weight. The sensation of something pouring in, like soil filling a mold. Memories came. Not his own. Burial mounds under moonlight. Fires burning at the base of trees that bled. Voices whispering in languages without consonants. A door carved into the center of a hollowed hill. Hands reaching up through graves, not to escape, but to pull others down. And above it all, the presence. The forest. Not just trees. Not just land. But something alive. Something ancient. A mind rooted across 1,000 years, fed by memory and blood in return. He collapsed. The clearing swam. Jonah knelt beside him, whispering now. "You were never meant to stay up there. That's why the door came back. That's why the face wore your skin. That's why it waited." Eliah coughed, his body twitching. His limbs didn't respond the way they should, his fingers dragged like wet clay, heavy and cold. His tongue felt thick in his mouth. "I'm not one of them," he croaked. Jonah looked at him gently, almost pitying. "You were. And you still are. You just forgot." He leaned close. "They don't want your death, Eliah. They want your shape. They want to wear you again. You were a bridge once. Now you're just a broken path. But if you let go..." Jonah's hand touched Eliah's forehead. "You can be whole again." The sky above split open with thunder. But it wasn't the storm. It was the forest. It cracked. And in the crack, Eliah saw something impossible, vast branches twisting through stars that didn't belong to the sky. Roots coiled around distant moons. A tree that grew from memories, not soil. A single presence, ancient and hungry, wearing forests like bodies. And it wanted him back. The face in the earth opened its eyes. They were his, but filled with soil. The earth stared back at him. Eliah's eyes, but not his, blinked open from the cracked soil at the center of the clearing. Wet soil slid down the face's cheeks, revealing skin not entirely human. It was him, but rendered wrong, the symmetry off, the skin both too smooth and too decayed in places. As though the forest had tried to remember him, and gotten most of it right. But not all. The eyes were wide, unblinking, dark with ancient knowing. They were the kind of eyes that had seen burial. Not once. Not over time. But forever. Jonah stood at the edge of the cracked seal, watching with reverence. The forest swayed behind him, not from wind, but from intention. The trees pulsed faintly in rhythm with the heartbeat Eliah had heard ever since opening that door in the cabin. It wasn't just sound. It wasn't even vibration. It was recognition. Every breath the forest took was tied to what was happening here. Now. Elijah tried to move, but his limbs were heavy with soil. His fingers, planted into the mud, didn't lift. He was sinking. Slowly. Inch by inch. The roots that coiled beneath him were not merely holding him in place. They were accepting him. Like a body sinking into warm water, welcoming, inevitable. His voice rasped from a throat slick with fog and dirt. "I'm not ready." Jonah knelt beside him. The warmth in his face had changed. Less compassion now. More certainty. "That's the lie they taught us, Elijah," he said softly. "That we're supposed to be ready before we're taken. But the forest doesn't wait. It remembers what belongs. It takes it back." Elijah trembled as the mud reached his ribs. The heartbeat from below, now louder, surged through his chest like a drumbeat beneath skin. His own pulse had begun to match it. And the face in the earth? It smiled. Not cruelly, but sadly. Like it understood the pain of remembering something you had buried for too long. Jonah continued. "They gave us names and bodies and sent us walking out into a world that forgot the forest. But we were never whole. The pieces we left behind kept calling." He pointed at the broken seal, the old root-covered circle of stone now crumbling inward, revealing the black shaft that led into the deeper dark. "You left the rest of yourself down there." Elijah remembered now. Not in images, but in sensation. He remembered falling years ago, long before the cabin, long before his name mattered. A tumble into a hollow in the woods. A root-wrapped chamber. A voice, soft and wet, whispering not in words but in a pattern of understanding. He had screamed, thrashed, pulled free. He had escaped. But not entirely. Something had stayed behind. Something vital. A piece of him that did not return. The forest had held on to it. And now it had made him come back. Elijah looked up at the trees. The sky was gone completely. Where once there had been gray daylight, now there was only a thick canopy of black leaves. The branches overhead were too dense, curling and interwoven like the nervous system of something colossal. Flickers of dull green-blue firelight pulsed through them, like bioluminescent veins. The forest was alive. And it was watching. The soil at his back had opened further now. He could feel the shift, not sinking anymore, but pulling. Like hands beneath the ground pressing upward against him, guiding his spine into the hollow. Fitting him into the place he had once been torn from. Jonah's hand rested on his shoulder. "You have to let go, brother. You have to remember who you were before they gave you the name Elijah." The figure in the earth opened its mouth. But it didn't speak aloud. The words came into his head. Not as thoughts, but as vines, curling around the structures of his memory, entwining his sense of self. "Do you remember the first forest?" Elijah gasped. A picture bloomed behind his eyes. Not of trees. Not of anything human. A landscape of memory, towering wooden pillars that bled sap in coils of silver. Pits where names were buried and grown like seeds. Mouthless faces carved into stone that whispered stories through the movement of worms. And above it all, the canopy, an impossible stretch of leaves that hummed with voices. He remembered walking there. Before his name. Before his first skin. Before the world forgot. He wasn't born from a womb. He had risen. From soil. From seed. His name had been a cage. He had been whole once. Bound to the others, the old ones, the silent siblings who wore trees as bones and rivers as veins. Then the fire had come. The burning men. They took his body, split it from its roots, and made him forget. The piece that stayed behind, the one buried beneath the hearth, the one shaped like the wooden doll, had remembered. And now it was calling him back. He choked on a sob. The tears that streamed down his cheeks weren't salt. They were sap. Jonah smiled. "Welcome home," he said. And then the forest opened. Not with noise, but with invitation. Behind the trees, the bark pulled apart like curtains, revealing a path that had not been there seconds before, an aisle of roots winding down into a tunnel carved by memory. Lightless, but alive. Glowing with recognition. Elijah stood. He did not remember rising, only that the soil had stopped holding him, and instead cradled him like a parent returning a child to their place in the world. The forest had changed him. His skin was thicker now, coated in ashen memory. His hands no longer trembled. The blood in his veins had cooled, thickened into something older. He looked to Jonah. "Will I forget again?" Jonah's smile faded. He looked away. "Only if you leave." Elijah turned toward the path. The face in the ground, his other self, had faded now, merging back into the dirt. It had never been a duplicate. It had always been a placeholder. A hollow in the shape of his soul. And now it was whole again. As he stepped into the root path, the trees behind him shifted, closing the way with gentle finality. No wind. No birds. Just the sound of his own heartbeat fading into something larger. And behind him, for just a moment, he heard the creak of cabin wood. Then the voice of the forest, low, many-mouthed, endless. "Now that you remember, the door may open fully." And deep beneath the roots, something smiled. Elijah walked without a map, but the path knew him. Roots curled back as he stepped forward, thick ropes of wood slithering away like limbs recognizing a brother long thought dead. The trees arched overhead in contorted reverence, their bark scabbed with old symbols, spirals, runes, slashes of language too ancient for books and too deep for voice. He no longer questioned the way. He no longer thought in the way a man thinks. His mind did not guide his feet. Something older did. Something underneath thought, beneath memory, a buried pulse that had waited years to be reclaimed. The air was wet and still. Every breath tasted of moss and rot and something sweet beneath it, the decay of something once sacred, like fruit left to ferment into wine. Above him, the forest canopy no longer resembled anything earthly. It curved in domes and spires, tangled into spiraling shapes that blocked the sky entirely. When he looked up, he saw only soft green bioluminescence, and veins of faint white flickering in time with some slow, unseen heartbeat. He was walking through the body of something. Not metaphor. Not dream. The forest was not just a place. It was an organism. A god grown from memory and hunger and silence. And he was walking through one of its arteries. Time folded. He couldn't say how long he walked. Hours. Days. No hunger. No thirst. The farther he moved, the more the constraints of the surface faded from him. Eventually, the ground began to slope downward. The roots underfoot changed, they grew tighter, more ordered. They twisted into deliberate shapes, rings, ovals, hexagonal patterns. As if the forest's mind had begun to focus here, to narrow its thought into a central convergence. Then came the sound. A low, hollowing hum, not vocal, not mechanical. It was the sound of knowing. It wrapped around him like a forgotten melody, one he'd hummed in sleep as a child without realizing it was a memory passed down from the root. Ahead, the path opened. Elijah stepped into the heart chamber. It was vast. An underground cathedral carved from root and soil and petrified bark, large enough to swallow a city block. The walls pulsed faintly, lined with capillaries of dim blue light. And in the center stood the hollow tree. It rose at least 10 stories tall, its bark blackened and smooth, its trunk split open in a perfect vertical seam that revealed nothing within, not emptiness, but absence. Like something had been scooped from the world and left behind only context. This was no ordinary tree. This was a wound in the world. And it beat. The hollow thudded with slow, steady rhythm. Elijah felt it in his teeth, in his bones, in the center of his forehead. It didn't echo, it existed. The sound was not heard, it was experienced. He stepped forward. The chamber was filled with others. Dozens, no, hundreds of figures lined the circular wall. Some sat in alcoves grown from root. Others knelt in the soil. All were humanoid, but not human. Their forms were shaped from bark, from moss, from pale fungal tendrils that swayed with slow breath. Each one wore a different face, carved from wood or stone or grown like a fruit, but beneath the face, they were all the same. Returned. Whole. They did not speak. They only watched. And at the base of the hollow tree, waiting in the folds of the blackened bark, stood a figure wrapped in roots that moved like living cloth. It was tall, faceless, its head crowned with a wide ring of fungal antlers. Its chest was open, and inside it, Elijah could see dozens of names floating like embers, names that writhed and rearranged and shone. He did not need to be told. This was the root mother. The architect. The one who planted the first memory. The one who shaped the soil to carry sorrow. The one who had pulled his brother from death and called Elijah home not with malice, but with necessity. Because something had been broken long ago. Something that only the returning could mend. The root mother raised a hand, bark-thin, long-fingered, heavy with lichen, and pointed to the hollow tree. Elijah stepped forward. As he approached, he heard the forest whisper around him, not in words, but in impressions. Echoes of lives he'd never lived. He heard birth cries beneath stones. He saw fire devour language. He felt a blade cut through roots that had once held the sky. He reached the seam of the hollow tree. The split down the center was wide enough for him to enter, though no light or depth could be seen within. It was like looking into death, but without fear. It was his origin. His destination. He turned back for just a moment. Jonah stood in the chamber now, beside the others. He nodded once, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Or sorrow. Or both. Elijah took a breath and stepped into the hollow. The world unraveled. There was no light, no color, only shape. A spiral. Endless. He was falling, but not down. Inward. Into memory. Into the first forgetting. Into the scream that had begun time. The forest was inside him now. And in the center of the hollow, he saw it. The seed. Small. Ordinary. And wrapped in skin. His skin. It beat once. Twice. Then cracked. Light poured out. And Elijah remembered. All of it. Before names. Before breath. Before bones. He had been the first shape. The one meant to carry voice into the surface. But he had fled. He had feared the fire of men and ran. And now he had returned to finish the pattern. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the hollow tree. He stood in a clearing. But it wasn't the cabin. It was the forest as it had been before. No fog. No rot. The sky above was gray and heavy with rain, but the trees were silent. He touched his chest. It was warm. The wound was gone. He looked down. At his feet was a new seal. A circle of stone unbroken. Fresh. No name carved into it. He looked to his right. The cabin stood again, quiet. Waiting. He knew what had happened. He had become the new seal. The memory returned. The circle complete. He was no longer Elijah. He was what Elijah had forgotten. And the forest was safe again for now. But from the trees, he could feel them watching. The ones who would come. The ones who would wander too deep. The ones who would dig. The ones who would open the door. And when they did, they'd hear a voice. You left something behind. Rain slanted through the canopy, fine and silver in the late afternoon gloom. The storm had begun hours earlier, steadily building, and now the forest drank from the sky with silent hunger. Leaves shimmered. Bark wept. And the narrow dirt trail that cut between the towering pines had softened into a slick black ribbon of muck. Mara pulled the hood of her coat tighter and pressed on. She hadn't meant to come this far. The trail had begun simply enough, marked on an old forestry map as Clearwater Loop, a 6-mile circuit around a long-abandoned ranger station. It wasn't listed on newer park guides. No maintained signs. The only reason she'd found it was because of a handwritten note on an obscure backpacking forum. If you want true silence, try Clearwater. No traffic. No birds. No echo. That had been the appeal. Mara wasn't here for sightseeing. She was here to forget. The past 6 months had stripped her. The accident. The loss. The weeks afterward, sleepwalking through a world that no longer had shape. Therapists had called it complicated grief, offered pills, mindfulness apps. None of it stuck. But the forest had. Something in her had whispered that the forest remembers things differently. So she came. But now she wasn't sure she'd ever left the trail. The trees had grown denser. No clearings. No birdsong. Even the wind had gone still. The path had narrowed until it was barely a depression between thickets of fern and twisted root. Her GPS was dead, no signal since noon, and her compass needle spun even when still. That had unnerved her. But the real shift came half an hour ago, when she stepped across the stream. It had been small, just a muddy trickle, but the moment she crossed, everything changed. The air. The pressure. The feeling that she had entered not another part of the forest, but another story. The silence had deepened. And with it, the sense of being watched. She didn't panic. Not at first. Just slowed down. Listened. But now it was too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels deliberate. Like something is listening to your listening. She paused beneath a warped pine whose branches drooped low like a withered umbrella, and checked her phone again. Still dead. The compass on her keychain continued its erratic spinning. She muttered under her breath. This was a mistake. Her voice felt wrong. Not just too loud, too sharp. Like sound didn't belong here. Like it had to force its way into the air. Then, just ahead on the path, she saw it. A shape. Something squatting low and broad just off the trail, half wrapped in moss and wet vine. From a distance, it looked like a boulder. But as she stepped closer, her breath caught. It was not stone. It was wood. A structure. A cabin. Half-rotted, sunken on one side, its roof collapsed in the middle like the lungs of a dying animal. The walls were wrapped in ivy and deep green lichen, but beneath the growth, the shape was unmistakable. She approached cautiously, footsteps muffled by sodden ground. Her breath clouded in the chill air. The cabin loomed larger than she expected, not just a shack, but a real structure. A porch. A door that hung slightly ajar. Shuttered windows. The boards were black with age, some warped open like yawning mouths. She reached the porch and hesitated. Something wrong. Not dangerous. Not violent. Just wrong. Like this place had been paused. Suspended in a moment that should not continue. She touched the door. The wood was warm. She jerked her hand back. Then, against instinct, she pushed the door open. The interior smelled of smoke and wet leaves and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The air was warmer than it should have been. Dust motes floated in the stillness, though there was no sunlight. The fireplace, though long dead, held a scattering of ash that steamed faintly. And at the center of the room, on the floorboards, sat a box. A small wooden box, no larger than a jewelry chest. It hadn't rotted. Its surface was polished, clean. A strange contrast to the decay around it. Drawn without understanding why, Mara knelt and opened the box. Inside was a carving. A figure. Rough-hewn, faceless, and small. Carved from dark wood and wrapped at the base with a thin length of vine. Across its back, a name had been burned into the grain. Mara. She blinked. How was that possible? She'd never been here before. No one even knew she'd taken this trail. She reached to pick up the figure, and the moment her fingers touched it, something whispered in the back of her skull. Not a voice. A direction. A pull. She stood, turned, and found, on the far wall of the cabin, a door. It hadn't been there when she entered. She was sure of it. Its surface was seamless, newer than the rest of the cabin. It pulsed faintly, as if something behind it breathed. There was no handle, no hinges, just a dark vertical seam in the wall, and a symbol carved above it, a spiral within a circle. It matched the one on the carving's chest. Mara approached the door. The air thickened. The light shifted. Behind the door, something pressed forward, not physically, but in presence. She placed her palm against the seam. The wood was warm. It recognized her. And with the faintest creak, the door began to open. Far beneath the forest, the others stirred. The seal had held. For years. Decades. Long enough for new moss to grow over the wound. But now, someone new had come. And the forest remembered her shape. The door slid open, revealing a darkness deeper than night itself, not the absence of light, but a dense presence that swallowed the edges of vision and seemed to pulse with its own slow, living heartbeat. The air inside was cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and earth long buried. Mara hesitated, one hand still resting on the warm seam of the door. Her breath came in shallow gasps, mist curling before her face like a ghost. Somewhere, far below, she could hear it, a faint, rhythmic thumping. Not loud, but steady. The sound of something alive, pulsing in time with the forest above. A narrow passage stretched before her, carved from root and soil, twisting downward into the unknown. The walls glistened faintly with veins of pale fungus, faint bioluminescent light pulsing in a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat beneath her feet. She swallowed her fear and stepped inside. The passage curved and narrowed, forcing her to stoop beneath low-hanging roots that dripped cold water onto the ground. Her boots splashed through shallow pools of muddy water that reflected the faint glow of the fungal veins overhead. The air grew colder and thicker, heavy with a silence that pressed on her eardrums. As she moved deeper, the faint sound grew louder, a wet, hollow thump that reverberated through the earth, syncing with her own heartbeat until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, spirals, circles, and shapes that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The floor was soft beneath her feet, covered in moss and thick root tendrils that writhed slowly, like the pulse of a sleeping giant. At the center of the cavern stood a massive tree root, blackened and smooth, split open down the middle like the hollow tree she had glimpsed in her dreams. From the fissure, a faint greenish light pulsed rhythmically, bathing the cavern in an eerie glow. Around the root, dozens of figures crouched or knelt, others like the ones Elijah had described. Their bodies were woven from bark, moss, and bone, faces blank and faceless. They swayed gently in time with the pulsing light, whispering in voices that echoed without words. Mara's skin prickled with unease. She took a hesitant step forward. One of the figures turned. Its face was a smooth wooden mask, carved with the same spiral symbol as the door. Its eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto hers. A whisper filled her mind, not spoken, but felt. "You belong." She staggered back, breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, a voice, familiar yet strange, echoed through the cavern. "The door opens for those who carry the shape." Mara spun around. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Elijah, or rather, something wearing Elijah's shape. His eyes glowed faintly, his skin shifting between flesh and bark, the scars of the forest etched into his form. He smiled gently. "Welcome, Mara. You've come far." "Why am I here?" she whispered. "Because the forest remembers you," he said. "And it needs you to finish what was started." Mara looked down at the wooden figure in her hand. The name burned into it. Her name. Her face paled. "What do you mean?" "I don't understand." Elijah stepped closer. "You carry the root of the past within you, the seed of the forest's memory. And if you do not answer its call," he gestured toward the fissured root, "the hollow will consume what remains." Mara's gaze flickered around the cavern. The others began to rise, their forms twisting and growing, branches sprouting from their backs, roots wrapping around their limbs. The pulsing light in the root deepened, the rhythm accelerating. A whisper grew louder, a chorus of many voices, all speaking in one breathless, urgent tone. "Finish the pattern. Seal the hollow. Become the root." Mara felt the pull again, stronger now, like a tide dragging her forward. Her hand clutched the wooden figure tighter. Elijah reached out, touching her forehead gently. "You are ready." Her vision blurred, the cavern spinning. Then everything went dark. Darkness folded around Mara like a living shroud, pressing in close, yet strangely warm. She could no longer feel the hard cavern floor beneath her feet, no longer hear the murmuring chorus of the others or the pulsing light from the fissured root. Instead, she was suspended in a boundless void, an endless black sea that shifted and rippled with slow, deliberate currents. Her breath came shallow, but steady. Somewhere deep inside, a heartbeat echoed, a slow, sonorous drumbeat, familiar and yet alien. It was not her own. A faint glow emerged ahead, like a star struggling to pierce thick fog. As she drew closer, the light blossomed into a vast, pulsating orb, suspended midair, throbbing with iridescent hues of green, gold, and brown. It was the heart of the forest itself, the core of the ancient entity that had woven roots into her soul. Mara reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing the glowing surface. The orb shimmered beneath her touch, sending ripples of color cascading through the void. Suddenly, voices filled the space, not words, but feelings, memories, echoes. They spoke of ages before time, of forests that sang beneath the stars, of roots that entwined the earth and sky. The voices pulsed in harmony with the heart's rhythm, weaving a tapestry of stories in her mind. She saw visions, fragments, fleeting but vivid. A child running through endless woods, laughter trailing behind like wind. A man kneeling by a hollow tree, carving a spiral into its bark with trembling hands. A shadow rising from the soil, twisting into countless faces, calling out names long forgotten. And then, her own face. Young, frightened, reaching out to something unseen, her eyes wide with wonder and terror. The heart pulsed faster. A voice Elias echoed softly inside her mind. The forest is memory. It is longing. It is the place where all forgotten things gather to be made whole again. Mara's body tingled as the heart's rhythm synced with her own pulse. She felt a surge of power coursing through her veins, filling the hollows left by loss and grief. But with it came a price. A cold tendril of doubt curled in the back of her mind, a whisper that whispered warnings she couldn't fully hear. The heart's glow intensified, bathing her in warm light. She felt roots weaving around her ankles, not binding but welcoming, pulling her deeper into the embrace of the forest's core. Memories, not all her own, poured in, a tangled weave of lives lived and lost, of names given and stolen, of promises broken and fulfilled. She understood now. She was not just a visitor here. She was part of this place. The seed of the forest's memory. The next link in an endless chain. Elia's voice grew stronger. To be whole, you must give the forest your shape. To heal the hollow, you must become the root. Fear and acceptance warred within her. The desire to flee clashed with the need to belong. But the heart's call was relentless, its rhythm a summons she could no longer resist. Her fingers closed around the wooden figure in her palm, the carving of herself, the symbol of her connection. The heart pulsed once, a brilliant flash of light. Mara felt herself dissolving, fragmenting into strands of light and shadow, sinking into the core of the forest's ancient memory. She was becoming root, becoming seed, becoming one with the forest's endless song. And as the last thread of her former self slipped away, a single thought echoed in the darkness. The door has opened. When Mara's senses returned, she found herself suspended in a liminal space, neither inside the hollow tree nor outside in the forest, but somewhere between memory and flesh, shadow and root. It was a place where time stretched and folded, and the air shimmered with the echoes of countless forgotten lives. Around her, the world breathed. Shapes coalesced and dissolved like smoke caught in a gentle breeze, faces blurred in and out of existence, limbs tangled in vines that shimmered with silver dew. The ground beneath was a living tapestry of roots and soil, pulsing faintly like a great heart. She tried to move but found herself tethered, not by chains, but by soft cords of light that wound gently around her wrists and ankles, anchoring her to the very essence of the forest. Yet these bonds were not cold or harsh. They throbbed with warmth and a strange tenderness, like a cradle rocking a restless child. A voice echoed softly in the spaces between thoughts, a whisper carried on the wind of memory. You are the seed, Mara. The next in the cycle. The root that will bind the fracture. Images bloomed in her mind, vast forests drowned in shadow, fires that devoured the canopy, voices crying out in despair beneath cracked earth. She saw hands reaching from the soil, grasping, searching, yearning to be made whole. The forest was wounded. And she was the remedy. Slowly, the cords of light tightened, drawing her closer to the heart's core. It was no longer a distant orb but a radiant pulsar of living wood and sap, veins of glowing amber coursing through it like lifeblood. The rhythm matched her heartbeat now, steady, unyielding, ancient. As Mara was pulled nearer, the memory of Elias' fate whispered in her mind. His sacrifice, his merging with the forest to seal the hollow, had kept the darkness at bay for years. But now, with the door opened, the cycle had begun anew. The forest needed her to take up the mantle. Fear crept beneath her skin, cold and insistent. The instinct to flee was strong, but something deeper, a quiet strength born of loss and longing, held her fast. The light enveloped her, and she felt her body dissolve into threads of shimmering sap and bark. Her consciousness expanded, flowing through the network of roots and leaves, carrying with it the memories of those who had come before. She saw the first forest, ancient and primeval, where the roots of the world first took hold. She saw the burning men, their flames not just destruction but erasure, wiping away names, memories, the very essence of being. She felt the forest's pain, a deep, aching wound that pulsed beneath the surface of all things. And then, a new image. A hand, reaching from the darkness beneath the hollow tree, fingers stretched wide, grasping for something beyond the soil. A face, half swallowed by earth and shadow, eyes wide with desperate hope. It was her own. Mara understood now. The forest's hollow was not just a place but a state, a fracture in memory, a gap in the endless song. And she was the key to healing it. But to do so, she had to surrender. To give herself fully to the forest's root. The cords of light tightened once more, not painfully, but with gentle insistence. And as Mara's form dissolved entirely into the heart of the hollow, a final thought echoed in the darkness. You will become the root that remembers. Mara's consciousness flowed like water, slipping through the endless tunnels of root and soil that wove beneath the forest. She was no longer confined by flesh and bone, her essence dissolved into strands of glowing sap, carried along the ancient pathways that pulsed with the slow, steady heartbeat of the forest itself. Around her, fragments of memory drifted like drifting leaves on a dark stream, echoes of voices long silenced, faces worn away by time, and the lingering sorrow of those who had been lost to the hollow. Each memory was a thread in a tapestry that stretched beyond comprehension, the lives of the forest's many children, born from seed and soil, swallowed by roots and reborn in shadow. Mara drifted closer to the heart, a vast cavern hidden deep beneath the surface. The air here was thick with the scent of moss and decay, a faint luminescence glowing from veins of fungal growth that spread like veins through the bark walls. In the center of the chamber stood the hollow tree, its split trunk wide and cavernous, the emptiness within humming with a power both ancient and terrible. This was the wound in the world, the place where memory had been torn away and left bleeding. Her new form moved toward the seam, a soft, beckoning pulse emanating from its depths. The light within flickered and danced, reflecting off countless carvings etched into the walls, spirals and circles, symbols of binding and release, woven by hands long since turned to dust. As she entered the hollow, Mara felt a strange sensation, a tug at the edges of her essence, as if pieces of herself were being pulled in different directions, drawn to distant places she could no longer see. She realized then that the forest's memory was not whole. It was fragmented, shattered into shards scattered through time and space. Her task was clear, to gather these shards, to weave them back into the forest's song, to become the root that remembered everything. But the cost was high. A whisper echoed through the hollow, a voice both haunting and familiar. To remember is to suffer. To hold all the pain is to lose yourself. Mara shuddered, the weight of that truth settling deep within her. She was the keeper now, the guardian of all that had been forgotten. And somewhere, deep within the root, something waited. A darkness that hungered not for flesh, but for memory. A hollow that would devour anything that dared to carry the forest's name without becoming whole. She was the key, the seal, the root. And the forest was watching. The hollow breathed. Not with lungs, not with breath, but with the slow, inexorable pulse of ages buried beneath earth and bark. Mara felt it through every fiber of her shifting form, a rhythm older than time itself, beating in her veins as surely as if the forest had claimed her soul as its own. Around her, shadows danced in the flickering light cast by veins of bioluminescent fungus that crawled over gnarled roots and cracked stones. The cavernous hollow was alive, not simply a place but a sentient presence, watching and listening and waiting. Her essence flowed deeper into the endless web of roots, each tendril carrying fragments of stories, whispers of lives long past yet never forgotten. She heard them, the names, whispered softly on the wind that wasn't wind at all. The voices of the forest's lost children murmured in tangled chorus. Aries, Kaylin, Vera, Elia. Each name was a thread in the tapestry Mara now bore. Each carried pain, fear, hope, and longing, a life lived and folded into the soil. Mara tried to hold them all, to carry their weight, but the burden was immense. The voices surged, weaving through her mind, tugging at the edges of her sanity. The hollow pulsed again, stronger this time. The light deepened, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. And within the shifting darkness, Mara glimpsed movement. A figure stood just beyond the glow, cloaked in shadow and woven from bark and mist. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin coals burning with ancient sorrow. It was the Watcher, a guardian of the forest's memory, bound to protect the hollow from those who would misuse its power. The Watcher stepped forward, voice a low rumble that shook the cavern walls. "Why have you come, seed of the forest?" Mara's form shivered, light rippling like water across her skin. I was called," she whispered, the echo of her own voice strange in this place. "To remember. To heal." The Watcher's gaze bore into her essence. "Many have come before you," it intoned. "Many have tried to carry the weight. But the hollow takes more than it gives." Mara felt the truth of that pressing down on her, the sacrifice, the loss, the gradual erasure of self that came with carrying the forest's memories. "What happens if I fail?" she asked, voice trembling. The Watcher's eyes flickered. "Then the hollow will consume all that remains. The cycle will end in darkness." A cold wind swept through the hollow, carrying the scent of wet earth and burning wood. Mara steadied herself, gathering the fragmented threads of memory within her. "I will not fail," she vowed. The Watcher nodded slowly. "Then begin. Gather the shards. Become the root that remembers, or be lost forever." With that, the figure faded into the shadows, leaving Mara alone in the pulsing heart of the hollow. She reached out with her essence, sending tendrils of light and shadow spiraling through the root web. The search had begun. Mara's essence stretched out like liquid light, threading through the labyrinthine roots beneath the forest floor. Each tendril sought out a shard, a fragment of memory, a lost name, a fragment of a soul swallowed by the hollow. These were not just echoes, they were pieces of lives, torn and scattered across time and space, waiting to be reclaimed. The cavern pulsed around her, the bioluminescent veins brightening and dimming in a slow rhythm, as if the forest itself were breathing. The air was thick with the scent of earth, moss, and decay, mingled with a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness, the essence of forgotten things. With every shard Mara touched, a flood of images and sensations poured into her consciousness. She saw flashes of laughter beneath ancient trees, the soft rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, the sudden flare of fire consuming a woodland clearing. She felt the sting of loss, the cold grip of fear, and the aching hope that had driven countless souls into the forest's embrace. One shard, faint and fragile, shimmered with the ghostly outline of a child's hand reaching upward. Mara followed its trail through twisting roots and dark soil, drawn ever deeper into the forest's memory. The deeper she delved, the heavier the burden grew. The voices whispered louder, overlapping in a haunting chorus that threatened to overwhelm her. Names tumbled through her mind: Aries, Kaylin, Vera, Elia, each with their own story of sorrow and survival. Mara clutched the wooden figure in her hand, its surface warm and pulsing in time with the forest's heartbeat. It was both anchor and reminder, the symbol of her place within this endless cycle. As she gathered the fragments, the hollow seemed to respond. The fissured root at the cavern's center glowed brighter, its light weaving through the root network like golden threads binding the fractured memories together. But not all was as it seemed. From the shadows emerged a presence dark, twisting, and ancient. It slithered through the roots like a living shadow, whispering in a voice that promised oblivion. "Why do you cling to the past?" it hissed. "Why carry the weight of forgotten pain when you could be free?" Mara's form trembled but did not falter. The weight of the forest's memory was heavy, but it was hers to bear. "I carry it because it must not be lost," she replied, voice steady despite the darkness pressing in. The shadow recoiled, writhing as if struck. It spoke again, softer this time. "The hollow consumes all who enter. It will claim you as it did the others." Mara's light flared, pushing back the shadow's tendrils. She reached out, weaving the gathered shards into a glowing braid of memory and essence. With a final surge, she returned the fragments to the heart of the hollow. The fissured root pulsed violently, then settled into a steady, luminous beat. Mara felt herself change. No longer fragmented, her essence now flowed as one with the forest's ancient rhythm. She was becoming the root that remembered. But deep within the hollow, a secret waited, one that could unravel everything she had fought to protect. The pulse of the hollow had steadied, a slow and solemn rhythm that echoed through Mara's very being. Her essence, now fully woven into the living tapestry of the forest, shimmered with new strength, a fusion of ancient memory and fresh life. She was no longer merely a visitor, she was the guardian, the root that remembered. Yet beneath the glowing surface of the fissured root, something stirred, something old and unspoken, buried beneath layers of time and silence. A presence. It was not a shadow nor a light, but something in between, lurking in the spaces where memory faltered. It was a secret hidden beneath the bark, a truth that the forest had guarded jealously for centuries. Mara felt it first as a whisper, a cold breath against the pulse of her being. It slithered through the roots, coiling like smoke around her essence, stirring doubts she had never known. "You carry the memories of many," it murmured, voice like rustling leaves. "But do you understand what you have become?" She paused, the woven memories within her shifting uncomfortably. The question was not one she could answer. The presence grew bolder, drawing her deeper into the hollow's heart, past the glowing fissure, into a narrow passage carved beneath ancient roots. The passage was lined with carvings, crude, jagged marks that did not match the graceful spirals and circles Mara had seen before. They pulsed with a dark energy, a language older than the forest itself. At the passage's end, a chamber opened, colder and darker than the rest. In its center lay an object half buried in moss and soil, a dark seed, black as night and slick with sap that shimmered like oil. Mara reached out, instinctively drawn. The moment her fingers touched the seed, a surge of images crashed through her mind, visions of a time before the forest, before roots grew and leaves fell. A place of emptiness, silence, and endless dark. The seed was the origin, not just of the forest, but of the hollow itself. It was the wound that had never healed. The forest's memory was a cycle of growth and decay, creation and destruction. And the seed was the source of the darkness Mara had sensed lurking beneath the bark. She recoiled, but the seed pulsed with a hypnotic rhythm, drawing her back again and again. A voice echoed through the chamber, cold, unyielding. "You cannot hide from what you are." Mara understood then that the forest's secret was not just a place, but a force. A darkness that fed on memory and grief, growing stronger with every forgotten name. To heal the hollow, she would have to face it. And to face it, she might have to lose herself. The chamber trembled as the seed pulsed, sending ripples through the roots. Mara took a deep breath, steadying herself against the weight of the forest's secret. She was the root that remembered. And now, she would confront the darkness at the heart of the hollow. The chamber around Mara felt impossibly vast and crushing all at once. The air was thick, scented with damp earth and something far older, something like despair pressed into the soil. The black seed pulsed beneath her fingertips, a slow, hypnotic throb that seemed to call to the deepest parts of her being, beckoning and warning at once. She could feel it beneath the bark, beneath the root, an ancient wound, raw and bleeding into the earth. It was the heart of the hollow, the source of the rot that had spread through the forest like a silent plague, swallowing memories and names in its ravenous hunger. Mara's thoughts spiraled. If the seed was the origin of this darkness, then destroying it might heal the hollow or end everything. The choice was suffocating. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a form, a towering figure draped in twisting roots and shadow, its face a blank mask of bark cracked and scarred. Its eyes glowed like dying embers, full of sorrow and fury. "You carry the memories," it said, voice deep and echoing, "but do you carry the strength to confront what you have buried?" Mara felt the weight of 1,000 whispered names press against her mind. The voices of the lost, the broken, the forgotten. "I carry them all," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling inside. The figure stepped closer, and the shadows deepened. The pulsing of the seed quickened, like a heartbeat racing toward collapse. "You must face the darkness," it said. "Only by embracing it can the hollow be sealed." A sudden surge of cold swept through Mara's essence. The forest whispered warnings and promises, pain and redemption tangled in one breathless moment. Her form began to dissolve into tendrils of light and shadow, pulled toward the seed. The darkness wasn't just around her, it was within her. Memories flashed, screams swallowed by silence, faces lost to shadow, a forest consumed from within. She realized then the cost of becoming the root that remembers. To heal the hollow, she must surrender herself completely, become both light and shadow, memory and oblivion. Her fingers closed around the seed. It pulsed once, then exploded in a wave of blinding light and crushing darkness. Mara was consumed. The forest held its breath. The explosion of light and darkness engulfed Mara entirely, a tempest of sensation that shattered the boundaries of her being. Time lost meaning, moments stretched into eternity, and then collapsed into singular instants of pure existence. She was no longer Mara. Not in the way she had been. Not fully. Her essence had fragmented and dispersed, scattering like leaves on a storm. Yet, simultaneously, she was everywhere, in every root, every glimmering leaf, every whispering wind that stirred the ancient forest. Her consciousness stretched, expanded, and then contracted again, folding inward toward a center both impossibly distant and intimately near. Within the void, a voice spoke, not with words, but with emotions, a flood of memories mingling with raw sensation. It was the forest itself, alive and aware. "You have given yourself to the root. You have become memory and shadow intertwined. The hollow cannot consume you now." Mara felt herself reforming, her essence knitting back together from the strands of light and shadow. She was changed, transformed into something neither wholly human nor fully forest. She was the guardian of the hollow. The pulse of the seed, now extinguished, was replaced by a steady rhythm, a heartbeat that echoed through the forest's veins. The rot would not spread. The darkness was held at bay. But in this new form, Mara perceived the forest differently. She heard every whispered name, every forgotten story, every secret buried beneath the soil. The memories were her burden and her gift. Yet the darkness lingered, not gone, but contained, like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. Her new existence was a balance between light and shadow, memory and oblivion, life and decay. She was no longer a person lost in grief. She was the root that remembered. And the forest was alive with her. The forest exhaled softly around Mara, a breath long held and finally released. The pulse she carried within was steady, slow, and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, deep and unyielding. Her senses expanded beyond the physical, weaving into the fabric of the woods, every leaf, every root, every whispering breeze part of her awareness. She drifted through the darkened canopy, feeling the hum of life mingled with the lingering shadows of decay. Though the seed's darkness had been quelled, its memory remained embedded like a scar on the forest's soul, a reminder of the fragile balance between growth and rot. Mara's essence flowed along the veins of ancient trees, tracing the patterns of long-forgotten roots that stretched for miles beneath the soil. Her presence was a soft glow within the dark, a guardian light ensuring the forest's fragile memories did not fade into oblivion. But the transformation came at a cost. As the root that remembered, Mara no longer felt the sharp edges of human fear or hope, only the slow, steady tide of the forest's endless cycle. Her grief had become something larger, something eternal, part of the forest's whispered songs and silent prayers. The night around her pulsed with life and quiet menace. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped, a faint rustle stirring the still air. Mara turned her awareness toward it, feeling the weight of countless eyes watching through the shadows. The forest was alive with watchers, spirits of the lost and forgotten, tied to her by threads of memory. They moved silently through the trees, guardians and echoes both, bound to the root that remembered. A sudden wind swept through the branches, carrying a whisper. "Remember us." Mara reached deep into the forest's memory, sending out tendrils of light to gather the stories that had been swallowed by time, tales of joy and sorrow, love and loss, fear and courage. She was the voice of the forgotten, the keeper of names. And though the darkness still waited beyond the edge, held back by the fragile seal she now embodied, Mara knew her vigil would never end. For the forest remembered. And so must she. Mara moved like a pulse within the forest's vast and tangled veins, her presence weaving seamlessly through roots and soil, bark and leaf. Every thread of her being thrummed with the slow, enduring rhythm of the hollow, a beat that echoed through the ages, weaving together the lives and memories of all who had ever entered the shadowed woods. She had become more than a guardian. She was the pulse, the breath, the root itself. The line between self and forest blurred until it no longer mattered where she ended and the ancient woods began. The memories of those who had come before her, lost children, forgotten travelers, the man named Elia, all whispered through her essence like a soft, eternal chant. The bioluminescent fungi lining the subterranean tunnels flickered gently in response, their light a delicate web of pale blues and greens that illuminated ancient carvings etched deep into the stone walls, spirals and circles, sigils of binding and release, the language of those who had tended this place for generations. Yet beneath the calm surface, Mara sensed a restlessness, a stirring deep within the roots that pulsed like a distant warning. Though the seed's darkness had been contained, the forest's wound was still raw, fragile beneath the surface. The balance she maintained was delicate, and the watcher's ancient spirits bound to the hollow moved with quiet unease. A ripple of movement brushed through the shadows ahead, a flicker of something not quite seen but deeply felt. Mara sent a tendril of awareness toward it, brushing softly against the unknown presence. A whisper stirred the air. The cycle turns. The forgotten awaken. Mara's essence tightened, drawing the memory threads closer. The forest had preserved their stories, but they hung on the brink, fragile as a spider's web in a storm. To lose even one would unravel the weave she had fought so hard to mend. Deeper in the roots, a cavern shimmered with spectral light, the resting place of names, memories folded into the earth's dark embrace. Here, the forest's heart pulsed strongest, a nexus of past and present, life and decay. Mara reached out, her form weaving through the glowing veins, pulling together fragments of forgotten stories, laughter echoing faintly beneath towering pines, tears shed beside ancient fires, promises whispered into the night air. Yet among these memories, a shadow flickered, a tale left unfinished, a thread pulled too tight. A name whispered with urgency. Ares. Mara's core shuddered. The lost child's memory was frayed, slipping beyond reach into the void. To save Ares was to heal a part of the forest's soul and to face the darkness that still lurked beneath the bark. She wove a strand of light around the fragile memory, anchoring it firmly to the heart of the hollow. The forest sighed in relief, its pulse steadying beneath her touch. But as Mara stabilized the memory, a distant tremor rippled through the roots, a warning that the cycle was far from complete, that the darkness was patient, waiting for a moment of weakness to seep back in. Mara's light glowed fiercely in response, a beacon in the vast, shadowed depths. She was the root that remembered, the voice of the forgotten, the guardian of the hollow's fragile truth. And the forest's breath was hers to hold. Mara's presence rippled through the forest's endless network of roots and veins, a soft pulse of light winding through the dark, fertile soil. Every moment she lingered here, she became more entwined with the ancient life beneath the surface, part guardian, part memory, part living root that reached into the forgotten past. The vastness of the hollow's memory stretched infinitely in every direction, a tangled web of stories, emotions, and lost names that whispered in the dark. The forest's breath was slow but steady, a lullaby woven from wind and rain, creaking branches, and distant echoes. Mara's awareness deepened as she navigated the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the earth. She could hear the faintest heartbeat, the pulse of roots growing, stretching, intertwining in a living dance older than any human memory. The bioluminescent fungi cast their faint glow, illuminating carvings etched in ancient tongues that twisted and curled like serpents on stone. She reached a vast chamber where the fissured root that had first drawn her here pulsed with gentle light. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and the soft chorus of whispers filled the space, voices folded into the soil like ancient melodies. Among them, one voice rang clear and urgent: Aries. The name stirred something deep within Mara's essence, a fragile thread tugged loose by the restless spirit of the lost child. Mara reached out with tendrils of light to cradle the fading memory, weaving it back into the fabric of the forest's soul. But as she held Aries' memory close, the shadows around the chamber shifted. A chill swept through the roots, carrying the scent of smoke and ash. From the darkness emerged figures, twisted shapes formed from gnarled bark and tangled vines, faces etched with sorrow and rage. The Watchers of the Hollow, once silent guardians, now moved with restless energy, their eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. They surrounded Mara, their whispers rising to a crescendo, a chorus of warning and plea. The Hollow breathes unrest. The cycle turns anew. Mara's light flared, steady and resolute. "I am the root that remembers," she declared. The voice of the forgotten. The Hollow's guardian. The Watchers hesitated, their forms swaying like branches in a storm. Then, one stepped forward, a figure draped in moss and shadow, its voice low and mournful. The darkness waits beyond the bark. It hungers for the lost names, the broken stories. It seeks to unravel the root. Mara's heart, now woven with the forest's pulse, quickened. "I will not let it consume what we have preserved," she vowed. "Together, we will hold the Hollow's breath." The Watchers nodded, their forms dissolving into the shadows once more. Mara stood alone in the chamber, the weight of the forest's memory pressing upon her. Outside, the wind rose, stirring leaves and bending branches in a silent warning. The Hollow's breath was fragile, and the darkness patient. Her vigil had only just begun. The forest around Mara was alive in a way that transcended the natural world. It was a breathing, sentient being stitched together by countless memories and endless whispers. Each step she took echoed through layers of roots and soil, reverberating across time and space as if the very ground remembered her passage. Her essence now moved with fluid grace, flowing through the subterranean veins like glowing sap. Every tendril carried the weight of ancient stories, weaving together the fragmented names and faces that had long been swallowed by the Hollow's dark embrace. Yet, beneath the beauty and mystery, a gathering shadow crept. The Watcher's warnings echoed like distant thunder in Mara's mind. The darkness beyond the bark stirred, hungering for the fragile memories she had vowed to protect. The pulse of the fissured root beat steadily beneath her, a glowing heart that anchored the forest's fractured soul. But the deeper she delved, the more Mara sensed the shadow's presence, a creeping chill that slithered through the roots like poison, infecting the light and silencing the whispers. She followed the thread of a fading memory, a child's laughter caught in a swirl of autumn leaves, the soft warmth of a mother's touch, a promise whispered beneath the stars. The memory led her to a cavern deep beneath the earth, its walls slick with dark sap and etched with ancient symbols that pulsed faintly with unseen power. In the center lay a pool of black water, still and unnerving, reflecting a sky she could not see. Mara approached cautiously, her essence mingling with the shadowed air. From the depths of the pool, a voice emerged, low, cold, and laced with an ancient hunger. You carry the root of memory, but can you withstand the weight of oblivion? Mara felt the shadows pressing close, tendrils reaching out to entangle her light. She reached within herself, drawing strength from the countless memories woven into her being. I carry the light of those who came before, she replied, voice steady despite the encroaching darkness. And I will not let it fade. The water shimmered, revealing faces twisted in sorrow and rage, lost souls consumed by the hollow's hunger, forever trapped between light and shadow. Mara's heart ached with the weight of their torment. But she was no longer alone. The watchers rose from the shadows, their forms steady and resolute. Together, they encircled the pool, their voices rising in an ancient chant that wove light into the darkness. The shadows recoiled, writhing like smoke caught in a gale. Mara felt the forest's breath steady, the pulse of the root growing stronger. Yet she knew this battle was far from over. The hollow's darkness was patient, and the shadows would gather again. The cavern beneath the forest pulsed with a strange light, the air thick with a scent both earthy and otherworldly, a mingling of damp moss, decaying leaves, and something ancient, something that whispered secrets just beyond hearing. Mara stood at the edge of the black pool, its surface still and dark like a void, reflecting no light but instead absorbing it, pulling the shadows inward with an almost sentient hunger. The watchers formed a protective circle around her, their forms shimmering between bark and shadow. Their whispered chants wove through the air, a delicate yet unbreakable web of sound that shimmered with the weight of countless forgotten memories. Mara's essence hummed in resonance, each pulse a heartbeat synchronized with the forest's own slow breath. The shadows pressing against the circle writhed, desperate to break through, to unravel the fragile balance she had fought so long to maintain. Suddenly, the surface of the pool rippled violently, distorting the reflection and sending waves of cold that reached into Mara's very core. From the depths, a shape began to form, nebulous and shifting, half seen and half imagined. It rose slowly, dragging the darkness with it like a cloak. The watchers' chants grew louder, a crescendo that echoed like thunder in the cavern. The entity surfaced, a colossal figure wreathed in tendrils of shadow and roots, its eyes burning with a cold, unyielding fire. It was the Warden of Oblivion, the ancient force that fed on the hollow's forgotten memories, the darkness that Mara had sensed since her first descent into the forest's heart. Its voice was a rumble that shook the stones. You cling to memories like a dying ember. But all light must fade. All names will be lost. Mara's form blazed with light, the memories she carried flowing through her like rivers of gold and emerald. She stretched her essence wide, weaving the threads of forgotten stories into a radiant tapestry that shimmered with life. You may hunger for oblivion, she said, her voice firm despite the weight of despair pressing against her, but I am the root that remembers. And as long as I stand, the forest will not forget. The warden roared, a sound that split the air like a crack of thunder, and surged forward, tendrils reaching to consume Mara's light. But the watchers surged too, their forms flowing into the fray, weaving shields of bark and shadow, finding the warden's grasp and slowing its advance. Mara felt herself pulled between forces of light and darkness, the battle raging not just in the cavern but within her very soul. The forest trembled. The hollow held its breath. And in that moment, Mara understood the true cost of her transformation. To protect the memory of the lost, she must become both light and shadow, bearer of joy and sorrow, guardian and sacrifice. The battle for the hollow was far from over. But she would not yield. The cavern shook with the fury of ancient forces clashing in the dark. Shadows writhed and twisted like serpents, struggling to choke the light that Mara wove around herself. The Warden of Oblivion loomed above her, its eyes blazing with a cold fire that threatened to consume everything she had become. But Mara stood firm, her essence pulsing with the memories of countless lost souls, the whispers of children who once ran beneath the canopy, the laughter of those now only echoes, the touch of those long vanished into the soil. She was the root that remembered, a living bridge between the past and the present. Around her, the watchers swirled, their voices rising in a mournful chorus that spoke of sacrifice, hope, and unyielding endurance. Their forms shimmered between bark and shadow, weaving a protective lattice that slowed the Warden's advance. The Warden roared, a sound like the tearing of the earth itself, and reached toward Mara with tendrils thick as ancient roots. But she met each with light golden, fierce, and alive, and pushed back the darkness, strand by glowing strand. Inside Mara, a storm raged. The darkness and light fought for dominion, tearing at her essence, threatening to sunder her into oblivion or consume her completely. But she held fast, drawing strength from the forest's endless memory, from the names and stories woven into her being. With a final, defiant surge, Mara stretched forth her light, entwining it with the deepest roots of the hollow. The watchers joined her, their voices rising into a crescendo that shook the cavern and echoed far beyond the forest's edge. The Warden screamed, a sound like the breaking of worlds, and recoiled, its form unraveling like smoke caught in a fierce wind. The darkness shattered, fragments scattering into the earth where the light consumed them, sealing the hollows wound once more. Exhausted, Mara's form flickered like a dying flame, her essence stretched thin but unbroken. The watchers gathered close, their voices softening into a gentle lullaby. The forest exhaled, the pulse of the hollow steady and calm once again. Mara understood now the truth she had sought, being the root that remembered was not just about preserving memory but accepting the pain and darkness entwined with it. It was a sacrifice, an eternal vigil against forgetting. As dawn's first light filtered through the canopy above, the forest whispered its gratitude. The hollow was sealed, but the cycle would continue, as it always did. Mara's essence settled into the roots, a quiet guardian watching over the forest's endless breath. She was the root. She was the memory. She was the forest. And the forest would remember. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the thick canopy, casting fragile shards of gold across the forest floor. Though the battle for the hollow's heart had seemingly ended, the forest itself whispered with restless energy, a subtle unease stirring in the undergrowth and shadowed branches. Mara felt it deep within her essence, the pulse of the root that remembered, and knew that her vigil was far from over. Her form, now fully fused with the forest's ancient network of roots and veins, stretched and flowed beneath the soil, reaching toward every corner of the woods. Every leaf above, every stone and hollowed log below, was part of the living memory she carried. But even as she wove the threads of forgotten stories into the vast tapestry of the forest's soul, Mara sensed a fracture, a subtle, persistent shiver running through the roots beneath the oldest trees, as if something had been disturbed far beyond the reach of her sight. She moved slowly, drawing her awareness to the oldest and tallest of the forest's giants, the shattered canopy above telling silent tales of storms long past and untold grief. The mighty trunks rose like ancient sentinels, their bark cracked and worn by time, their branches tangled in a chaotic web against the pale sky. Beneath one such towering colossus, Mara sensed a disturbance. The roots here throbbed with an erratic pulse, a stuttering heartbeat that resonated uneasily against her steady rhythm. She traced the energy downward, her essence threading carefully through a maze of soil and stone until she came upon a fissure, a yawning crack in the earth, narrow yet impossibly deep, its edges slick with damp moss and dark sap. From this fissure came a faint but unmistakable vibration, the echo of a presence, something old, wounded, and awakening. Mara hesitated, the weight of the memories she carried pressing upon her like a heavy cloak. This fissure was unlike any she had encountered before, less a wound-healed and more a scar reopened, raw and pulsing with hidden dangers. As she reached closer, tendrils of shadow curled from the depths of the crack, twisting and writhing like smoke caught in a cold wind. A voice rose from the darkness, faint yet insistent, a whisper at the edge of understanding. Remember us. The words carried the weight of desperation and longing, weaving into Mara's mind like a song half remembered. These were not the voices of the lost soul she had gathered before, but something else older, more fractured. A memory beyond memory. Her light flickered as she stretched further into the fissure, trying to unravel the tangled threads of this new enigma. Images flared briefly before dissolving, a circle of figures cloaked in shadow, standing beneath a moonless sky, ancient rites performed in silence, promises broken and secrets buried beneath layers of earth and time. Mara's essence recoiled slightly at the taste of bitterness and sorrow mingled with the whispers. This was a hidden wound, a secret kept by the forest itself, waiting patiently beneath the shattered canopy to be unearthed. A chill settled deep within her core. The forest had protected this secret for centuries, but the fissure was widening, the barrier thinning. The watchers, sensing her unease, gathered close, forms flickering between bark and shadow, their eyes reflecting concern and a muted warning. Mara knew she could not ignore the fissure's call. To protect the forest, to preserve the delicate balance she now embodied, she would have to journey deeper into this shadowed fracture, into the very heart of the forgotten pain beneath the shattered canopy. And in doing so, confront truths that might unravel everything she had fought to hold together. The fissure yawned wider beneath the shattered canopy, a silent wound cutting through the earth's ancient skin. Mara's essence flowed cautiously toward its depths, every tendril pulsing with the weight of memories yet unspoken and secrets long buried. The air around her shimmered with a restless tension, an energy both magnetic and foreboding, pulling her into the unknown. As she descended deeper into the fractured heart, the forest's breath grew heavy and uneven. The steady rhythm that had once guided her now faltered like a hesitant heartbeat, echoing faintly in the hollow spaces between twisted roots and crumbling stones. Shadows stretched and twisted along the jagged walls of the fissure, cast by the faint glimmers of bioluminescent fungi clinging stubbornly to the damp rock. Mara's senses sharpened, attuned to every whisper of movement and sigh of the earth. The deeper she went, the more fragmented the memories became, scattered shards of laughter and tears, cries swallowed by silence, faces glimpsed through shifting mists of time. Each fragment tugged at her essence, a thread begging to be woven back into the tapestry of the forest's soul. Amid the fractured memories, a darker presence loomed, something ancient and fractured, bound within the earth itself. It pulsed with a sorrow that seeped into Mara's core, filling her with a profound sense of loss and yearning. A voice echoed through the hollow, low and mournful. You seek to mend what was broken, but some wounds are deeper than roots can reach. Mara's light flared in response, weaving protective tendrils around the fragments she carried. I will carry their stories, no matter the cost, she whispered. For memory is the root of life, and I am its keeper. The fissure suddenly widened into a vast cavern, its walls etched with ancient symbols glowing faintly in the darkness. At its center lay a circle of stones, worn smooth by countless years and inscribed with marks that pulsed with a forgotten magic. Mara approached the circle, sensing that it was a place of power, a nexus where past and present converged, where the forest's deepest secrets whispered. As she touched the stones with her essence, visions flooded her mind, a ritual long lost to time, a gathering beneath a starless sky, promises made and broken, and a shadow falling over the land. The memory was bittersweet, heavy with regret and unspoken pain. Mara understood now. The fissure beneath the shattered canopy was more than a wound, it was a scar of betrayal, a fracture born from a time when the forest itself had been torn apart by fear and sorrow. Her duty was clear. To heal the root that remembered, she would have to face the fractured heart of the forest's past and confront the shadows that lingered still. The watchers gathered beside her, their forms steady and resolute. Together, they would journey into the depths of forgotten pain, to reclaim the stories lost beneath the shattered canopy. The forest's breath was slow and steady once more, but the journey ahead promised to be long and fraught. Mara braced herself, her light steady against the growing darkness. For she was the root. and she would remember. The cavern's air hung heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken grief and the silent echoes of a past long buried beneath layers of moss and stone. Mara's essence pulsed softly as she moved through the circle of ancient stones, their worn surfaces inscribed with symbols older than memory itself. The forest's breath around her was a fragile whisper, a fading heartbeat struggling to hold against the creeping darkness. As Mara reached out, tendrils of light weaving delicately through the cold air, fragments of memory surged forward, visions of a time when the forest was young, vibrant, and whole. She saw gatherings beneath endless skies, figures cloaked in shadow and moonlight, voices raised in song and ritual. But beneath the beauty lay a deepening fissure, a fracture in trust and hope that spread like a stain through the roots of the ancient woods. The watchers circled silently, their forms flickering like candle flames caught in a restless breeze. Their eyes reflected sorrow and resolve as they shared the burden of the fractured past with Mara, their voices a quiet murmur threading through the cavern. "The pain runs deep," one whispered, "woven into the roots by those who sought to claim the forest's power for themselves." Mara's light grew stronger, weaving protective patterns around the fragile memories as shadows twisted at the edges of her vision. The darkness was no longer distant, it pressed close, whispering promises of oblivion and release. From the depths of the cavern, a cold wind rose, carrying voices from the forgotten echoes of betrayal, sacrifice, and despair. The memories tangled in Mara's mind like thorned vines, sharp and suffocating. Faces appeared and vanished, names half remembered and stories left unfinished. She felt the ache of loss, the sting of broken promises. But beneath the sorrow, a faint glimmer of hope pulsed. Mara's essence reached deeper, threading light through the tangle of shadows, pulling at the knots of grief with gentle persistence. She understood now, healing the forest meant embracing the pain, not fleeing from it. The root that remembered must hold both light and shadow, joy and sorrow, life and death. As the watchers raised their voices in a solemn chant, the cavern seemed to breathe anew, the pulse of the hollow steady and sure, a testament to endurance and remembrance. Mara felt the weight of countless stories settle around her, a mantle both heavy and sacred. The journey through the fractured heart had only begun. Beyond the shattered canopy, the forest waited, with all its secrets, all its ghosts, and all its memories yet to be reclaimed. The deeper Mara ventured into the fractured heart, the heavier the silence became, a silence thick with weight and meaning, suffused with the lingering sorrow of voices that had long ceased to speak aloud. The air around her was cool and still, carrying faint hints of damp earth and wilted leaves, a scent that clung like a memory too fragile to forget. The cavern widened into a vast hollow, a silent growth hidden beneath the shattered canopy. Ancient trees with twisted roots and gnarled branches stood sentinel, their limbs reaching skyward as if pleading for answers that had long since vanished. The ground beneath was carpeted in a thick blanket of moss, soft and velvety but concealing secrets in its depths. Mara's essence drifted through the grove like a gentle breeze, her tendrils brushing softly against the bark of the ancient trees. Each one pulsed faintly with memory, fragments of lives entwined with the forest's history, stories of joy and pain woven into every knot and scar. But here, beneath the silent grove, Mara sensed something else, a lingering shadow that dulled the light within the roots, a fading thread of a story left unfinished. She followed the trail with care, weaving her light into the darkness, coaxing forth hidden fragments. A child's laughter echoed faintly, mingling with the rustle of leaves, and then, suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the grove, carrying a whisper that seemed to seep from the very earth. "Do you remember me?" Mara's essence shuddered at the voice, fragile and desperate, a plea tangled in the thorns of time. She reached deeper, threading light through the shadow, drawing forth a memory long buried, a small figure cloaked in sorrow, wandering lost beneath the forest's endless green. The watchers appeared silently at her side, their forms shimmering with ancient resolve. "The lost one," one murmured. "Aries." Her memory phrased like a dying ember. "If she fades completely, the hollow's wound will open anew." Mara's heart pulsed with urgency. To save Aries was to stem the tide of darkness threatening to unravel all she had fought to preserve. She wove a gentle net of light, cradling the fragile memory, anchoring it firmly within the roots of the silent grove. The forest sighed in relief, its pulse steadying beneath her touch. But as the shadows retreated, Mara knew the darkness had not been defeated, only pushed back, waiting for another moment of weakness. The forest around her seemed to lean in closer, its breath slow and watchful. The journey through the fractured heart was far from over. And somewhere, deep beneath the silent grove, the forgotten waited, holding secrets that could change everything. The silent grove held its breath beneath the shattered canopy, a fragile stillness that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Mara's very essence. The moss beneath her tendrils whispered stories of forgotten days, secrets buried deep in soil rich with time and sorrow. Each breath she took was heavy with the weight of countless memories, some joyful, some aching with loss, all woven into the forest's endless tapestry. Mara moved slowly, feeling the forest's fragile heartbeat steady beneath her touch. The memory of Ares lingered like a fragile ember glowing faintly in the darkness, a beacon she was determined to protect. Yet the shadows still lurked at the edges of her awareness, patient and hungry, like vultures circling a distant prey. Her essence stretched further into the grove, weaving light through the roots, seeking out the faintest echoes of lost stories. The watchers followed silently, their forms flickering between bark and shadow, guardians bound by solemn duty to the root that remembered. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the earth beneath her, a ripple of unease that shivered through the roots like a whispered warning. The fissure beneath the shattered canopy pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm different from the forest's gentle breath, more urgent, more deliberate. Mara focused, sending tendrils deep into the earth, tracing the pulse to its source. There, nestled in a hollow twisted by time and shadow, she found it, a stone altar, cracked and weathered, etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The altar was old, older than the forest itself, a relic of rites long forgotten but never fully buried. As she reached out to touch the altar with her essence, a vision washed over her, a circle of cloaked figures standing beneath a moonless sky, hands raised in silent invocation. The air shimmered with the scent of smoke and old magic, thick with promises made and broken, sacrifices whispered in the dark. The watchers stirred, their voices low and reverent as they shared the memory, their forms glowing softly with the light of remembrance. Mara understood then that the fractured heart of the forest was more than a wound, it was a nexus of power and pain, a place where past and present converged in an endless dance of light and shadow. To heal the hollow, she would have to confront not only the darkness lurking in the roots but the echoes of ancient choices etched into stone and soul. Her light flared, steady and fierce, a beacon in the encroaching gloom. The forest's breath slowed to a hush, waiting for what would come next. For Mara was the root that remembered. And the heart's echo was calling. The cold stone altar stood like a silent sentinel in the heart of the cavern, its surface etched with sigils that seemed to pulse faintly beneath Mara's touch. The ancient magic woven into the stone was palpable, a tension hanging in the air as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting for the story to unfold. Mara's essence shimmered, weaving through the darkened chamber as fragments of memory spilled into her consciousness, flickering images of robed figures gathered beneath a sky shrouded in darkness, their faces hidden in shadow. Hands raised in invocation, murmured chants weaving through the night air like a spellbinding song. Flames flickered in the circle's center, casting long, trembling shadows across the twisted roots and jagged stones. The watchers gathered close, their voices a soft murmur that echoed through the hollow. They told of a ritual long forgotten, one meant to bind the forest's power and protect it from a looming threat. But something had gone wrong. The ritual had fractured the forest's soul, opening a wound that had never fully healed. Mara felt the weight of that fractured past settle over her like a shroud. The root that remembered was burdened not only with the memories of those lost to the hollow but with the echoes of choices made in desperation and fear. A sudden chill swept through the cavern as the shadows deepened, coalescing into a shape both terrifying and sorrowful, a figure draped in darkness, its eyes glowing with a cold, ancient fire. It was the remnant, the fragment of the failed ritual's power, a lingering shadow that fed on pain and forgotten promises. The remnant's voice was a whisper and a roar all at once. You seek to mend what was broken, but the forest's heart is stained with blood and shadow. To heal it, you must face the darkness within yourself. Mara's light flared defiantly, weaving a protective web of radiant energy that shimmered like woven silk through the air. She reached deep into the well of memories she carried, pulling forth the stories of hope and courage that had survived despite the darkness. I am the root that remembers, she replied, her voice steady and strong. I carry the light of all who came before, and I will not let the darkness claim this forest. The remnant advanced, tendrils of shadow reaching out like grasping fingers. But Mara met each one with a burst of light, pushing back the encroaching gloom with the strength of countless memories intertwined. The cavern trembled as light and shadow clashed, a battle not only of power but of will and remembrance. Mara's essence stretched thin, her form flickering like a candle in the wind, but her resolve never wavered. She knew this was more than a fight for the forest's soul, it was a reckoning with the darkness that lurked within herself, within the very root that remembered. The watchers lent their strength, their voices rising in an ancient chant that wove light into shadow, hope into despair. And as the cavern shook with the force of their struggle, Mara understood that the forest's healing would come not from denying the darkness but from embracing it, accepting the pain, the sorrow, the fear, and letting them become part of the root's endless memory. The battle raged on, a storm of light and shadow entwined beneath the shattered canopy. And Mara stood at its center, the unyielding root that remembered. The cavern trembled beneath the weight of the ancient conflict, its walls echoing with the clash of light and shadow that surged like a storm within its depths. Mara's essence flickered, caught between the relentless pull of darkness and the fierce glow of memory that illuminated her from within. Each breath she took was a delicate balance, a dance between despair and hope, pain and healing. The remnant loomed, a shifting mass of shadow and sorrow, its tendrils reaching outward like the roots of a withering tree seeking to consume the last flickers of life. Its voice was a chorus of lost souls, a symphony of grief and rage that sought to drown Mara's light in a sea of oblivion. But Mara was more than a single soul, she was the root of many, a living repository of stories woven through countless lifetimes. She reached deep into the forest's memory, drawing forth threads of light, fragments of laughter beneath rain-drenched leaves, whispered promises shared beneath starlit skies, the steady pulse of a heartbeat that refused to fade. Her light grew stronger, weaving around the remnant like an intricate tapestry of hope and resilience. The shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing as the radiant threads bound them tighter and tighter. The watchers circled, their forms glowing with an ethereal light as they joined in the weaving, their voices rising in a haunting chant that filled the cavern with an almost sacred resonance. The air shimmered with the power of remembrance, a force both fragile and unbreakable. Mara felt her essence expand, becoming one with the ancient roots that stretched beyond the cavern, beyond the forest, connecting her to the very heartbeat of the earth itself. She was no longer just a guardian but a conduit of the forest's will, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. The remnant's form faltered, shadows unraveling under the weight of the weaving. Its anguished cry echoed through the hollow, a final, fading lament as the light consumed it, sealing the wound that had bled for centuries. As silence settled over the cavern, Mara's light softened into a gentle glow, pulsing steadily like the breath of the forest. The watchers gathered close, their forms shimmering with quiet reverence. Mara understood that healing was not an end but a beginning, a constant weaving of light and shadow, memory and loss, life and decay. The root that remembered was a living thing, forever entwined with the delicate balance of the forest's soul. Above, the shattered canopy rustled softly in the breeze, the first light of dawn filtering through the leaves like a promise renewed. Mara's essence flowed back into the roots, a steady pulse guarding the fragile breath of the hollow. The forest remembered. And so would she. With the cavern now silent, and the remnant of darkness woven into a fading memory, Mara's essence flowed back through the roots like a gentle tide returning to the shore. The forest sighed, a sound like the exhale of centuries, resonating softly through the towering trees and tangled undergrowth. The shattered canopy above seemed to breathe with newfound life, sunlight breaking through fractured branches, casting warm, dappled patterns on the mossy floor below. Yet, beneath this fragile calm, Mara felt the faintest tremors stirring deep within the soil. It was not the echo of old wounds but the whisper of something new and emergence, a subtle shift in the balance she had so painstakingly restored. Her tendrils stretched out with cautious curiosity, weaving through the earth, threading light into the tangled web of roots. There was a pulse, a heartbeat unlike any she had known, slow and steady, but marked with an unfamiliar cadence. It hummed beneath the older, steadier rhythms of the forest, a secret heartbeat calling from far beneath the surface. Mara followed the pulse deeper, past roots older than memory, beneath soil rich with ancient decay and new growth. The watchers flitted close, their bark-formed faces reflecting her concern and wonder, silent companions in this unfolding mystery. The journey led her to a small hollow nestled under a fallen tree, a place untouched by shadow, yet strangely vibrant. From within the hollow sprouted a delicate shoot, its tiny leaves glistening with dew despite the deep shade. This was a new root, fresh and tentative, weaving itself into the great network. But Mara sensed more, a presence near the shoot, faint and flickering like a candle's last flame. She reached out gently, her light enveloping the fragile sprout, sensing the life force intertwined with it. There, hidden beneath the surface, was a spark, an echo of something ancient and alive, waiting to awaken. Suddenly, the air shifted, the forest's breath quickening as if holding itself on the edge of discovery. The watchers gathered close, their forms shimmering with anticipation and quiet caution. Mara realized that the hollow was not only a place of remembrance but a crucible for renewal. The cycle she guarded was turning once more, ushering in a new chapter written in light and shadow. Yet, with renewal came risk. The delicate balance was fragile, and the new root's emergence could awaken forces still lurking in the depths, forces that had waited patiently through ages of silence. Mara's pulse steadied, her resolve sharpening. She was the root that remembered, the guardian of both past and future. To protect this fragile dawn, she would have to embrace the unknown, to walk the path between light and darkness once again. As the new shoot reached upward, breaking through the decay, Mara whispered into the forest's breath. We remember. We grow. We endure. And the forest answered in kind, a quiet murmur of leaves, the rustle of awakening life beneath the shattered canopy. The dawn's gentle light filtered through the canopy, touching every leaf and blade of grass with a fragile warmth that seemed almost sacred after the long nights beneath the shattered trees. Mara's essence flowed with it, delicate and vibrant, a thread of golden light weaving through the dense web of roots and soil beneath the forest floor. The pulse of the hollow had steadied, yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension rippled like a barely heard heartbeat, something ancient, something awakening. Mara followed this subtle vibration deep into the earth, her senses attuned to the delicate dance between growth and decay. The new shoot she had found earlier was now accompanied by a cluster of tiny saplings, their leaves trembling as though caught in an unseen breeze. It was a sign the forest was healing, but healing was never simple. Every new beginning carried with it the shadows of the past. The watchers accompanied her, silent and watchful. Their bark-clad forms shimmered in the soft light, eyes glimmering with ancient wisdom and quiet vigilance. They were the forest's memory keepers, its sentinels against the creeping darkness that sought to unbalance the fragile harmony. As Mara moved, a faint sound reached her, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on bark, or footsteps echoing just beyond the veil of perception. It was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the forest's usual chorus of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. But to Mara, it was a disturbance, a whisper that hinted at a presence not wholly part of the natural world. She paused, her light dimming to a gentle glow as she listened. The tapping grew more insistent, shifting rhythmically, as if trying to communicate. The watchers stiffened, their forms flickering like shadows caught in sunlight. Mara extended a tendril of light toward the source, threading it carefully through the dense underbrush. The rhythm became clearer, a pattern emerging, a message encrypted in sound. Her mind reached out, weaving through the forest's memory, seeking a connection. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette half hidden among the ancient trees, cloaked in moss and leaf litter, eyes glowing faintly with a spectral light. Mara's heart pulsed with recognition and cautious hope. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting like mist caught in the morning sun. "I am the keeper of forgotten paths," the voice whispered, soft and haunting. "I have watched as the forest healed, but the shadows linger. The root you tend is vital, but not alone. There are others, fragments of the forest's soul scattered like seeds upon the wind." Mara's light pulsed steadily, weaving around the keeper with threads of understanding and trust. "What must I do?" she asked, voice steady but tinged with the weight of her burden. The keeper's eyes glimmered like stars fading at dawn. "You must seek the other roots. Only together can the forest truly renew. But beware, the shadows watch and wait, eager to unravel what you have mended." As the words settled, the forest seemed to hold its breath once more. Mara's resolve solidified like the oldest oak's heartwood. She was the root that remembered. And now, her journey had grown. The forest around Mara hummed with the fragile pulse of life renewed, yet beneath that vitality lay the ever-present shadow, a restless breath that stirred the undergrowth and whispered through the tangled branches. Mara felt it keenly, a prickling at the edges of her essence, a warning woven into the very soil beneath her. With the keeper of forgotten paths guiding her steps, Mara began a journey unlike any before, one that would take her beyond the familiar depths of the hollow and into the forgotten corners of the ancient woods. Each root she sought was a fragment of the forest's fragmented soul, a thread of memory that had scattered like leaves in a storm, waiting to be reclaimed and woven back into the living tapestry. The path was winding and treacherous. The canopy thickened and thinned, shadows lengthened, and whispers flickered like ghosts on the breeze. Mara's essence moved with careful grace, stretching tendrils of light into the dark soil, searching for the faintest pulse of remembered life. Her first destination was the Grove of Lost Echoes, a place steeped in silence and shadow, where the roots of ancient trees tangled like forgotten fingers. Here, the memories were fragile, frayed by time and neglect, but still alive, waiting for the light to stir them back to life. As Mara entered the grove, the air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The watchers fell silent, their forms blending seamlessly with the gnarled trunks and curling vines. The forest seemed to lean in, listening for her touch. She found the first root nestled beneath a fallen tree, a thin shoot glowing faintly like a dying ember in the dark. Mara reached out, weaving her light around it, coaxing the fragile memory awake. Images flickered at children running through sun-dappled glades, whispered stories told beside crackling fires, the laughter of lives once lived but nearly forgotten. The root pulsed stronger, feeding on Mara's light, growing resilient once more. But the shadows were near. Mara felt them lurking, watching from the edges, waiting to unravel the fragile healing. The keeper's voice was a soft whisper in her mind. "The roots are scattered, but each is a key. Find them all, and the forest will reclaim its strength. But the shadows will seek to corrupt, to divide." Mara nodded, her resolve hardening like stone worn smooth by the passage of time. She would gather the roots. She would weave the memories. She would face the shadows. For she was the root that remembered. And the forest's fate rested in her hands. The Grove of Lost Echoes faded behind Mara as she ventured deeper into the forest's tangled heart, the weight of the gathered root pulsing gently beneath her essence. The light she carried illuminated twisted pathways and gnarled trees that seemed to lean closer with every step, their bark etched with scars and stories only half remembered. Though the warmth of the new root bolstered her spirit, the shadows grew heavier. They seeped from the cracks in the earth, pooling in hollows and beneath ancient stones. Mara sensed them lurking just beyond her reach, silent watchers intent on unraveling the fragile web she wove. The keeper of forgotten paths moved beside her, a faint glow surrounding its moss-clad form. Its eyes, reflecting the forest's endless twilight, remained fixed on the shifting darkness ahead. The shadows feed on forgotten pain, it whispered, voice like rustling leaves. They seek to fracture the roots before they can be united. Mara's light flared in response, weaving shields of shimmering threads around the roots she carried. But the forest's breath grew shallow, the familiar rhythm disrupted by an unnatural chill that seeped through the soil and into her core. As night fell beneath the canopy, the forest transformed. The silhouettes of trees twisted into grotesque shapes, shadows stretching and writhing like living things. The watchers became spectral guardians, their forms flickering between solidity and mist, eyes burning with fierce determination. Mara followed the pulse of another root deeper still, into a hollow known as the Vale of Whispers, a place where the forest's silence was broken only by faint, mournful murmurs. The ground here was uneven, strewn with fallen branches and tangled roots that threatened to trip the unwary. Reaching a knotted root tangled beneath a stone altar cracked with age, Mara felt a surge of memories wash over her, fragments of sorrow, betrayal, and hope interlaced with the ancient magic binding the forest. But as she extended her light toward the root, a cold, suffocating presence surged forward, the shadow's tendrils coiling like serpents, aiming to choke the fragile memory. Mara met the assault with a fierce burst of radiant energy, her essence flaring like a beacon against the consuming dark. The watchers joined her, their voices rising in a solemn chant that wove threads of protection through the veil. The shadow recoiled, its hissing lament echoing through the hollow as it withdrew into the depths. Exhausted but resolute, Mara anchored the root firmly within the network, feeling its strength pulse steadily alongside the others she had gathered. The forest's breath steadied, but the fight was far from over. The shadows would not rest. And neither would she. For Mara was the root that remembered. The Vale of Whispers hung heavy in the air like a shroud, a place where silence and shadow wove together in a fragile dance that Mara could feel pressing on her very essence. The roots she had gathered pulsed with a tenuous strength beneath her, yet the shadows that stalked this forgotten hollow were not mere echoes of the past, they were alive, hungry, and cunning. Mara's light flickered as she moved deeper, weaving protective threads into the soil, binding the roots closer, urging the fragile memories to hold fast. The watchers followed silently, their bark-clad faces solemn and unyielding, eyes gleaming like embers in the gloom. From the shadows came a stirring, a ripple through the darkness, subtle yet unmistakable. Tendrils of black mist writhed at the edges of her vision, whispering promises of oblivion and release. Mara's breath caught as the forest's pulse faltered for a moment, a silent warning that the balance was threatened. She reached out, weaving a web of light to catch the encroaching gloom, but the shadows surged forward, shattering her delicate weave like brittle glass. The watchers raised their voices in a low, resonant chant, a hymn of endurance and remembrance that filled the hollow with an ancient power. The dark tendrils recoiled, retreating but not defeated, leaving behind a chilling echo of their presence. Mara's essence trembled with exhaustion, yet her resolve burned brighter than ever. She understood that the shadows were testing her, probing for weakness, seeking to unravel the roots before they could unify. As she pressed onward, a sudden gust swept through the hollow, carrying with it a whisper, a voice both haunting and familiar. "Remember me." The words were a fragile thread pulling at Mara's heart, stirring a memory she had long buried beneath layers of time. A figure appeared in the dim light, a woman cloaked in woven leaves and twilight, her eyes shimmering with sorrow and fierce determination. "I am Ilara," the figure whispered. "Once, I was part of this forest's heart. But betrayal severed my roots, and I was cast into shadow. Now, I seek to reclaim what was lost." Mara's light reached out, intertwining with Ilara's fading essence, weaving the broken fragments back into the growing web of life. "But beware," Ilara warned, her voice trembling. "The shadows you face are born not only of darkness but of pain and regret. To heal the forest, you must also face what lies within yourself." The watchers nodded, their forms flickering with solemn agreement. Mara understood then that her journey was as much inward as it was outward, a reckoning with the shadows in the hollow and the shadows within her own route. As dawn's first light broke through the shattered canopy, the forest seemed to hold its breath once more, poised between hope and despair. Mara's essence pulsed steadily, a beacon in the gathering twilight. She was the root that remembered, and the forest's fate rested on her. The forest held a fragile stillness beneath the shattered canopy, the dawnlight filtering softly through the skeletal branches as Mara's essence lingered on the edge of awareness. The whisper of Ilara's voice echoed faintly in her mind, a haunting reminder of the pain and betrayal woven deep within the hollow's heart. Mara drifted slowly, her light weaving gently through the roots she had gathered, each one humming with fragile life. But beneath the steady pulse, an undercurrent of tension lingered, a silent echo reverberating within the root that remembered. It was a shadow born not only of the forest's scars but of her own hidden fears and regrets. Her essence recoiled briefly, folding inward as memories flickered like fractured mirrors, visions of loss, choices made in desperation, moments of doubt that had never been voiced aloud. The root that remembered was not merely a guardian of stories but a vessel for every sorrow and joy ever breathed into the soil. Ilara's warning took form in the shifting shadows at the edge of Mara's consciousness, whispering of the darkness she must confront within herself if she hoped to heal the forest. With trembling resolve, Mara reached inward, threading light through the tangled memories, unraveling the knotted fears that clung like ivy. She felt the weight of loneliness, the sting of sacrifice, and the ache of uncertainty, all woven tightly into her being. Yet, beneath the despair, a faint glimmer of hope shone, a promise that even in the deepest darkness, life could find a way to grow. As Mara embraced her inner shadows, her light flared brighter, weaving a radiant web that stretched through the forest's roots and branches alike. The watchers gathered close, their forms steady and warm, lending their strength to the healing weave. The forest responded, a gentle rustling of leaves, the soft murmur of flowing water, the distant call of a bird breaking the silence. Mara felt the roots pulse steady, stronger than before, a testament to the power of acceptance and remembrance. But the journey was far from over. The shadows beyond the hollow still stirred, restless and waiting. Mara's path would lead her deeper, into the very heart of the forest's forgotten past and the secrets it held. For she was the root that remembered. And in remembering, she would find the strength to face whatever darkness awaited. The forest's breath grew heavier as Mara pushed further beneath the shattered canopy, the filtered sunlight dimming into muted shadows that clung like cobwebs to ancient trunks and tangled roots. The air was thick with moisture, carrying the scent of earth and decay mingled with the faintest trace of smoke, an echo of past fires long extinguished yet never forgotten. Mara's essence moved with cautious determination, weaving delicate threads of light around the roots she carried. Each one pulsed with fragile life, but the forest itself seemed to tremble beneath an unseen weight, as if struggling to hold itself together. The watchers flanked her silently, their bark-clad faces solemn and alert. Their eyes, dark pools of ancient wisdom, scanned the shifting shadows with a vigilance born of centuries spent guarding the hollow's secrets. Their path led to a place known only in whispered legends, the Weeping Stones. A circle of towering monoliths carved from black granite, stained with streaks of rust red and veined with luminescent moss. They stood like silent sentinels over a deep depression in the earth, where the roots of the forest tangled in a chaotic knot. As Mara approached, the ground beneath her pulsed with a slow, sorrowful rhythm, the heartbeat of the forest's deepest wounds. She reached out, her light weaving around the twisted roots, feeling the weight of countless memories trapped within the ancient stone circle. Visions flooded her mind, shattered promises, desperate bargains made beneath moonless skies, the slow unraveling of trust that had torn the forest apart long ago. A soft murmur rose from the watchers, their voices joining in a somber chant that echoed through the hollow. The air thickened with the power of remembrance, a force both fragile and unyielding. But beneath the surface, a darker presence stirred, a tendril of shadow curling like smoke around Mara's light, seeking to choke the fragile hope she carried. The ground trembled as the shadow coalesced into a figure draped in ragged bark and thorn, eyes glowing with a cold, cruel light. You carry the past, it hissed, voice like splintering wood. But the past is a prison. Release it, and all will be lost. Mara's light flared fiercely, weaving a shield of radiant threads that shimmered like woven silk in the gloom. I am the root that remembers, she said, voice steady despite the cold that gnawed at her core. And I carry the forest's stories, its pain, its hope, its truth. The past will not bind us. It will make us stronger. The shadow lunged, tendrils whipping through the air, but Mara met each strike with bursts of light, the watchers joining in a symphony of resistance that pulsed through the stones and roots alike. The battle waged beneath the weeping stones was fierce and relentless, a clash not only of power but of memory and will, of fear and courage intertwined. As dawn's first light crept over the shattered canopy, the shadow shrank and fragmented, retreating into the depths of the hollow. Mara's breath was heavy, her light steady but weary. The roots she carried pulsed stronger now, their fragile life intertwined with hers. The weeping stones stood silent once more, guardians of memory and hope. Mara knew the journey ahead would grow ever darker and more perilous. But she would not falter. For she was the root that remembered. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, casting fragile golden beams that danced across the forest floor like fleeting promises. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a reminder of both life and death entwined in eternal balance. Mara moved forward slowly, her essence glowing faintly amid the shadows, carrying the weight of roots gathered in battles fought beneath the hollow's shattered heart. The forest around her seemed to breathe in sync with her pulse, a fragile rhythm of renewal and decay. Each step carried her deeper into the labyrinth of twisted roots and ancient stones, toward the heart of the hollow itself, a place whispered about in stories, a nexus of power and memory where the forest's true soul was said to reside. Mara's tendrils of light reached out, threading through the dense undergrowth, weaving a protective web around the fragile life she bore. The watchers moved silently beside her, their bark-like forms blending seamlessly with the ancient trees, eyes glowing with fierce determination and deep knowing. As she approached a clearing marked by the roots of the oldest tree in the forest, its gnarled trunk scarred by time and shadow, the ground beneath her thrummed with an ancient power, steady and profound. This was the root from which all others flowed, the origin of the hollow's memory and strength. Mara knelt, her light pulsing in harmony with the tree's slow, steady heartbeat. She wove the gathered roots together, their fragile energies intertwining into a single, vibrant pulse that echoed through the forest's veins. The watchers raised their voices in a solemn chant, their words weaving a tapestry of remembrance and hope that filled the clearing with radiant warmth. But beneath the surface, the shadow stirred uneasily, sensing the consolidation of power and the rekindling of the forest's spirit. A chill breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying voices long silenced, warnings and lamentations that twisted like thorns around Mara's light. From the depths of the hollow, a dark shape emerged, a figure cloaked in shifting shadows, eyes glowing with cold fire. It was the embodiment of the forest's pain and regret, a remnant of broken promises and forgotten sacrifices. You cannot bind the past to your will, it hissed, voice like cracking ice. The hollow's heart is fractured beyond repair. Mara's light flared defiantly, weaving a radiant shield that shimmered like spun glass. The root remembers, she said firmly. And from memory grows strength. The past is not a chain but a foundation. The shadow lunged, tendrils of darkness reaching to snuff out the light, but Mara stood unwavering, the strength of countless stories flowing through her. The watchers surged forward, their voices rising in a powerful crescendo that pierced the gloom. The clash of light and shadow rippled through the hollow, shaking the very roots of the ancient tree. But Mara's resolve held fast, her light weaving ever brighter as the forest's heartbeat steadied in response. As the first true dawn broke over the shattered canopy, the shadow dissolved into mist, its threat retreating for now. Mara rose, breath steady but heart racing, the pulse of the hollow strong beneath her touch. She was the root that remembered. And the forest was beginning to heal. The forest breathed softly beneath the burgeoning light of a rising sun, the shattered canopy filtering the dawn into a delicate lattice of golden shadow. Mara's essence pulsed gently, woven seamlessly into the vast network of roots and earth that stretched endlessly beneath her feet. Each tendril of light was a thread in the tapestry of the forest's history, a history both beautiful and marred by wounds that ran deeper than bark and soil. Her journey through the hollow had brought her to the oldest heart of the forest, a place where time seemed to fold back upon itself, where memories lingered thick in the air like morning mist. The roots here were ancient beyond measure, twisted and sprawling in labyrinthine veins beneath the earth, carrying stories etched into their very fibers. Mara's light flowed with reverence as she traced these veins, following the pulse of countless lives entwined across centuries. She felt the joy of young saplings stretching toward the sun, the sorrow of ancient trees felled by storms, the whispered secrets of creatures long vanished into legend. Each memory was a pulse of life and death, a vital rhythm that bound the forest together. Yet amid this weave of light and shadow, Mara sensed something deeper, an undercurrent of unrest threading through the veins, a murmur of something hidden and unresolved. Her tendrils moved cautiously, probing the dark soil, unraveling a tangle of forgotten stories tangled with raw, unhealed pain. The watchers moved silently beside her, their bark-like forms blending with the roots as they hummed in low, melodic tones an ancient song of protection and remembrance. Together, they uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the forest floor, a place sealed away by time and sorrow. Inside, Mara's light illuminated carvings etched into stone, depicting figures cloaked in shadow and light, guardians and betrayers, healers and destroyers, all bound in a cycle of sacrifice and renewal. The chamber thrummed with the echo of an ancient ritual, one meant to bind the forest's soul in harmony but torn asunder by fear and mistrust. Mara reached deep within herself, weaving her essence into the roots entwined around the chamber's heart. The watchers joined their voices, rising in a chorus that filled the space with warmth and power. The forest's veins pulsed stronger, memories once fractured now threading together in a fragile but radiant weave. But the shadows stirred still, uneasy in the light, whispering warnings of fractures yet unseen and dangers yet to come. Mara's resolve hardened. She was not only the root that remembered but the guardian who would face whatever darkness waited beyond the veil. The forest's breath quickened in anticipation, and Mara stepped forward, ready to delve deeper into the veins of memory and confront the shadows within. The deeper Mara ventured beneath the shattered canopy, the thicker the silence became, a silence that was not absence, but presence, a breath held in the lungs of the ancient forest, waiting, watching. Each step sent ripples through the tangled roots, and with each pulse, Mara felt the delicate heartbeat of the hollow grow more fragile, as if balancing on the edge of a knife. The watchers flanked her, their bark-like forms barely stirring as they became one with the shadows and light alike. Their eyes, ancient and knowing, shimmered with faint phosphorescence, illuminating the path ahead, a labyrinthine network of roots and stones woven into the forest's darkened underbelly. Mara's essence extended, threading ribbons of light through the earth's veins, reaching for fragments of memory that fluttered like moths trapped between worlds. The air here was thick with the scent of moss and wet stone, and an unspoken weight settled over the hollow, a reminder that this place was a threshold, a breathing space between what was and what might be. As she passed through a narrow tunnel carved by roots centuries old, Mara came upon a vast chamber, a hollow vast and hollow indeed, where the air shimmered with a faint luminescence, casting eerie patterns across the rough-hewn walls. Stalactites dripped slowly, each drop echoing like a distant heartbeat in the cavernous silence. At the chamber's center lay a pool of still, dark water, a mirror to the forest above and the sky beyond, reflecting not only the light but the shadows cast by both. Mara knelt beside it, her reflection rippling gently as she gazed into the depths. From the water's surface rose whispers, soft voices weaving tales of sorrow and hope, of promises made and broken, of lives entwined in the eternal cycle of growth and decay. Mara's light wove through the murmurs, seeking threads to pull, stories to bind. Suddenly, the water stirred violently, and as shadow rose from its depths, a figure cloaked in shifting mist, eyes gleaming like fractured stars. It was the guardian of the breath between worlds, a sentinel born of both memory and oblivion. "You stand at the threshold," the figure intoned, voice like wind through dry leaves. To pass, you must face the breath between worlds, the fragile space where memory and forgetfulness collide. Mara's light flared in response, steady and unwavering. I am the root that remembers, she declared. And I will carry the stories forward, no matter the shadows that seek to claim them. The Guardian's form shimmered, rippling like a disturbed reflection, and then it vanished into mist, leaving behind a silence charged with potential. Mara rose, feeling the weight of the forest's breath settling around her like a cloak. She understood now that the journey ahead was not only through the tangled roots and fractured memories but through the very spaces where light and shadow intertwined, places fragile, precarious, and profound. With the watchers beside her and the pulse of the hollow steady beneath her essence, Mara stepped forward, ready to embrace the breath between worlds and the truths it held. The chamber's silence wrapped around Mara like a heavy, velvet curtain, muffling the world beyond and drawing her deeper into the space between moments, the breath between worlds where time seemed to slow and memories drifted like spectral wisps. The shimmering water still pulsed faintly, reflecting not just the fractured canopy above, but fragments of dreams long forgotten and promises made in twilight. Mara knelt beside the pool once more, her essence dipping delicately into the cool depths, threading tendrils of light through the murky memories hidden beneath the surface. The watchers gathered close, their presence steady and unwavering, a circle of silent guardians bearing witness to the forest's vulnerable heart. As Mara's light wove through the shadows, shapes began to take form, ghostly echoes of lives once lived, faces blurred yet filled with yearning, hands reaching through veils of time to grasp at moments slipping away. From these echoes emerged a figure, neither fully light nor shadow, a child with eyes wide and shimmering like pools of liquid starlight. The child's voice was a soft murmur, a melody tinged with longing and innocence. Remember us, it whispered, voice barely more than a sigh. We were lost between dreams and waking, forgotten by the forest we called home. Mara's heart pulsed with a mixture of sorrow and determination as she reached out, weaving her essence around the child's fragile form, anchoring it gently within the growing web of memories. The watchers' chants rose in a haunting harmony, threading light into shadow, weaving hope into the fabric of the hollow soul. But the threshold was fragile. The shadows writhed with restless hunger, seeking to unravel the delicate bonds Mara crafted. Tendrils of darkness reached out from the cavern's edges, curling like smoke around the roots and memories. Mara's light flared fiercely, pushing back the encroaching gloom with radiant waves, but she knew the battle was far from over. The threshold between memory and oblivion was a battleground, a place where past and present collided in a fragile dance. As the first rays of dawn pierced the chamber's gloom, the child's form solidified, becoming a beacon of light amidst the fading shadows, a symbol of the forest's enduring spirit. Mara rose, her resolve strengthened by the fragile dream she had reclaimed. The watchers closed ranks, their voices weaving a protective veil over the hollow. Mara was the root that remembered. And within the threshold of forgotten dreams, she would kindle the light that refused to fade. The dawn's gentle light slipped through the fractured canopy, casting elongated shadows across the forest floor like ghostly fingers stretching toward a forgotten past. Mara moved with deliberate grace, her essence a radiant thread weaving through the tapestry of ancient roots and whispered memories. The watchers flanked her, their bark-clad forms blending seamlessly with the gnarled trees as they followed her deeper into the forest's heart, a place where the veil between worlds thinned, and the echoes of the past reverberated with haunting clarity. The path led to a vast hollow, a natural amphitheater carved by time and silence. The air here was thick with the scent of moss and old stone, and the ground beneath Mara's feet thrummed with a slow, steady pulse, the heartbeat of the forest itself. Around the hollow's edge, towering trees stood sentinel, their branches interlaced like ancient fingers guarding a sacred secret. Mara knelt at the hollow's center, reaching out to touch the earth. Her light spread outward, weaving a shimmering web that stretched across the roots and stones, illuminating carvings etched into the bark and soil, symbols of protection, loss, and renewal. The watchers' voices rose in a low chant, their melody a bridge between the tangible and the ethereal, binding the forest's fractured memories into a fragile harmony. As the chant deepened, Shadows flickered at the hollow's periphery, whispers of lost souls caught between worlds, their forms shifting like smoke in the dawnlight. Mara's heart tightened, sensing their longing, their sorrow. From the depths of the hollow emerged a figure cloaked in twilight, its eyes glimmering with both pain and hope. It was the spirit of the hollow itself, a guardian born of ancient grief and enduring love. "You weave the threads of memory," it intoned, voice like the rustle of autumn leaves. "But the hollow remembers more than light. It holds the weight of forgotten promises and buried fears." Mara's light pulsed steadily, weaving protective tendrils around the spirit and the watchers alike. "I am the root that remembers," she replied softly. "And I carry both the shadows and the light, the pain and the hope. Only by embracing them all can the forest heal." The spirit nodded, its form shimmering like morning mist. "Then listen well, for the hollow song is not yet complete. There are echoes yet unheard, wounds yet unhealed." As Mara listened, the hollow seemed to breathe, its pulse quickening as forgotten memories stirred in the earth beneath. The watchers closed around her, their chant rising in a crescendo that filled the forest with a luminous hum. The shadows receded, but the weight of the hollow's secrets lingered, a reminder that healing was a journey, not a destination. Mara rose, her resolve unwavering. The root that remembered was not alone. Together, they would weave the forest's fractured soul into a new tapestry of light and shadow. The air grew colder as Mara pressed onward, the fractured canopy thickening overhead into a dense weave of twisted branches and dark leaves. The forest around her seemed to draw inward, folding itself into a somber silence that weighed heavy on her essence. The watchers moved silently beside her, their bark-crusted faces stoic but alert, eyes flickering with the faintest glimmers of light like distant stars in an endless night. Ahead, the path narrowed, winding through a tangled thicket that seemed to absorb the feeble daylight. This was the Silent Grove, a place where even the wind dared not disturb the stillness. Legends whispered of it as the resting place of ancient sorrow, a sanctum where the forest's deepest secrets lay buried beneath layers of moss and forgotten time. Mara's light dimmed as she stepped into the grove, her tendrils of essence reaching cautiously into the dense shadows. The ground was soft and damp beneath her, carpeted with fallen leaves that muffled her passage. The watchers gathered close, their silent presence a shield against the oppressive quiet. In the heart of the grove, Mara found a massive tree, its trunk gnarled and cracked like the face of an old guardian bearing scars of untold centuries. Roots like serpents coiled around the earth, weaving a complex pattern that pulsed faintly with an ancient rhythm. Mara knelt before the tree, her light weaving delicately around the roots, coaxing forth the memories buried deep within. Images flickered like fragile flames, faces blurred by time, voices muted by grief, moments of joy eclipsed by loss. Suddenly, the silence broke, not with sound, but with a trembling in the earth beneath her. The watchers stiffened, their forms blurring with urgency. From the shadowed edges of the grove emerged a figure, a woman draped in tattered vines and leaves, her eyes shining with a fierce, sorrowful light. It was the spirit of the Silent Grove, a guardian of forgotten pain and unspoken truths. "You carry the weight of many sorrows," the spirit whispered, voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "But some wounds run too deep to heal with light alone." Mara's light flickered, steadying with quiet strength. "I am the root that remembers," she said softly. "And I will carry these sorrows, not as burdens, but as threads to weave a stronger whole." The spirit nodded, reaching out a hand entwined with creeping ivy. "Then listen well, for the grove holds secrets yet untold, truths that will challenge your resolve and shape the fate of the hollow." As the grove seemed to breathe around them, Mara felt the forest's pulse quicken, a heartbeat tangled with hope and shadow, light and darkness intertwined. The watchers closed ranks, their voices rising in a solemn hymn that echoed through the silent trees. Mara rose, determination burning bright within her essence. The root that remembered would face whatever truths lay ahead. For the forest's soul depended on it. The Silent Grove's oppressive stillness clung to Mara like a shroud, Yet beneath that silence lay a simmering tension, as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting for something long overdue. The watchers stood close, their bark-like limbs intertwined with the ancient trees, their presence a living shield against the encroaching darkness. Mara's essence pulsed with steady light, though the weight of the sorrow she had drawn from the grove pressed heavy on her core. The memories she wove were not just of pain but of betrayal, trust broken, bonds severed, and promises lost beneath layers of earth and shadow. The spirit of the silent grove, a figure of tattered leaves and moss, moved beside her, eyes reflecting centuries of grief and wisdom. "These truths will test you," the spirit murmured, voice like wind rustling through dry branches. "Not all wounds can be healed by light alone. Some must be faced in their rawness, embraced fully before they can be transformed." Mara nodded, her tendrils of light weaving delicately through the tangled roots beneath her feet. "I carry the weight of the forest's soul," she said quietly, "and I will not turn away." The grove seemed to respond, the air thickening with whispered voices, shadows flickering at the edges of perception. Faces formed in the darkness, figures both familiar and strange, caught between worlds, their eyes pleading for remembrance. As Mara reached deeper into the tangled web of memories, she felt a presence lurking just beyond the veil, a shadow not born of the forest but of something older, darker. It was a wound in the hollow soul, a fracture that threatened to unravel all she had worked to heal. The watchers stiffened, their forms blurring as they prepared to confront the growing threat. Mara's light flared, weaving a shield that shimmered with fierce determination. The shadow emerged, a figure cloaked in shifting darkness, eyes glowing with cold fire. It spoke without words, a torrent of cold, bitter emotion flooding Mara's mind, fear, anger, regret, the raw undercurrent of pain left unspoken for too long. Mara stood firm, her light weaving tightly around the roots, binding the fractured memories together. "You are part of the whole," she said softly, voice steady as the forest's heartbeat. "Not a force to be feared or denied, but a piece of the story that must be told." The shadow hesitated, then slowly, tendrils of darkness began to unravel, melting into the light like mist at dawn. The grove sighed in relief, the oppressive silence lifting just slightly as the balance shifted. Mara's resolve deepened. The burden of truth was heavy, but necessary. For the root that remembered knew this was the path to healing, embracing the shadows as much as the light. And the forest's soul depended on her strength. The forest's silence lingered as Mara pressed deeper into the silent grove, each step a delicate balance between light and shadow. The canopy above wove a tapestry of fractured sunlight and creeping gloom, filtering the day into a soft twilight that blurred the boundaries between past and present. Mara's essence pulsed steadily, tendrils of radiant light weaving through the dense roots that sprawled beneath her feet. The watchers moved silently around her, their forms blending with the bark and moss, eyes flickering with a quiet vigilance born of centuries spent guarding the forest's heart. Beneath the earth, the roots whispered a low, sonorous hum that resonated deep within Mara's core. These whispers were the forest's oldest stories, tales carried through generations of trees, passed from root to root like sacred songs. Mara knelt, pressing her light into the soil, drawing forth the whispers and weaving them into a shimmering tapestry of memory. The roots spoke of ancient pacts and forgotten betrayals, of growth and decay entwined in an eternal dance. They told of the forest's pain, yes, but also of its resilience, the relentless will to survive and thrive despite the shadows that sought to claim it. Yet beneath these whispers lurked a darker thread, a voice twisted with sorrow and rage that sought to unravel the fragile harmony Mara worked to restore. The watchers stiffened, sensing the growing unrest, their silent song shifting to a protective chant that wove through the roots like a shield. From the depths of the earth emerged a figure, cloaked in shifting shadows and tangled vines, eyes glowing with a fierce, unsettling light. It was a spirit born from the forest's darkest memories, a guardian twisted by grief and loss into something both beautiful and terrifying. "You seek to mend what was broken," it hissed, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "But some wounds fester beneath the surface, hidden and untouchable." Mara's light flared with steady courage. I am the root that remembers, she said firmly. And I will carry all the stories, the light and the dark, the joy and the sorrow. Only by embracing all can the forest truly heal. The spirit hesitated, then slowly, the tangled vines around it began to unravel, revealing a figure both ancient and vulnerable beneath the shadowed guise. Its eyes softened, reflecting the light Mara carried. The Watcher's chant grew stronger, weaving a protective net around the roots and memories, binding the fractured soul of the forest tighter with each note. Mara reached out, her essence entwining gently with the spirits, bridging the gap between shadow and light, past and present. The forest exhaled a breath of release and renewal that stirred the leaves and awakened the roots. Mara rose, her heart steady, the weight of the whispers both a burden and a blessing. She was the root that remembered. And the forest's song would continue. The twilight deepened beneath the dense canopy, the fractured light growing dim as Mara pressed onward through the heart of the forest. The silent grove behind her was swallowed by shadows, yet its memory lingered like a fragile ember within her essence, a reminder of the truth she had embraced and the burden she now carried. Around her, the Watchers moved with unyielding vigilance, their bark-like forms blending seamlessly with the ancient trees. Their eyes, faintly glowing with an ethereal light, scanned the encroaching gloom, ever watchful for the shadowed threats that twisted beneath the surface. The roots beneath Mara's feet pulsed with a restless energy, a warning that the fragile balance she had fought to restore was teetering on the edge of collapse. The forest's breath quickened, carrying whispers of unease that tangled with the rustling leaves and distant thunder. Ahead, the path narrowed, winding through a tangle of twisted branches and thorned vines that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and impending rain, a heavy weight pressing down as the forest braced against an unseen storm. Mara's light flickered, steady but strained, as she reached out to weave protective threads around the roots she carried. The Watchers' voices rose in a solemn chant, their song a shield against the gathering darkness. From the shadows emerged figures, shapes cloaked in mist and sorrow, eyes glowing with a cold fire. They were the remnants of forgotten grief, anger turned to shadow, haunting the edges of the forest's soul. The Watchers surged forward, their voices weaving a tapestry of resistance as Mara's light flared fiercely. The clash of light and shadow rippled through the tangled roots and broken branches, a battle not just for the forest's body but for its very essence. As the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and chilling, Mara felt the storm within herself mirror the tempest rising around her. The roots pulsed stronger, weaving together in a fragile yet unbreakable bond, a testament to resilience born of memory and hope. The Watcher's chant swelled, a crescendo that shook the forest's bones and scattered the shadowed figures like leaves before the wind. But Mara knew the storm was far from over. The gathering darkness was only beginning to reveal its true form. And she, the root that remembered, would stand steadfast against it. The rain fell in sheets, heavy and relentless, drumming against the shattered canopy like 1,000 whispered warnings. The forest groaned beneath the weight of the tempest, branches thrashing and roots heaving as the earth drank the storm's cold fury. Mara stood at the center of the swirling chaos, her light a beacon flickering against the dark tide that threatened to consume everything. Around her, the Watchers formed an unyielding ring, their bark-like limbs rooted deep into the sodden soil, faces solemn as the storm's roar filled the hollow. Their chants rose above the thunder, a steady rhythm that wove through the howling wind and the crashing rain, binding the forest's fractured soul with threads of resilience and memory. Mara's essence pulsed in time with the Watcher's song, tendrils of radiant light weaving frantic patterns through the tangled roots and broken stones beneath her feet. The roots she carried pulsed wildly, a fragile heartbeat struggling to hold against the encroaching darkness. From the storm's swirling shadows emerged the final and most terrible presence, the embodiment of the hollow's deepest fears and regrets, a towering figure cloaked in tempest and shadow, eyes burning with the cold fire of forgotten anguish. "You cannot save this place," it boomed, voice like thunder tearing through the night. "The hollow is doomed, its roots severed beyond repair. Let go, and be free." Mara's light flared defiantly, weaving a shield that shimmered like woven glass. I am the root that remembers, she declared, voice steady and unwavering despite the storm's fury. And I carry the forest's soul, its pain, its hope, its life. The hollow will not fall while I stand. The figure roared, lashing out with tendrils of shadow and wind, but Mara met each strike with bursts of radiant light, the watchers' voices rising in a soaring hymn of defiance. The battle raged, a furious dance of storm and light, shadow and memory, tearing at the very fabric of the hollow. The ground trembled beneath the clash, roots twisting and pulsing as if struggling to hold the forest's heart intact. In the eye of the storm, Mara found a calm resolve, her light steady and strong, a beacon amid the chaos. She reached deep within herself, weaving the fragmented roots into a single, unbreakable bond, a pulse of life that surged through the hollow's veins. The shadowed figure faltered, its tempestuous form unraveling beneath the strength of Mara's will and the watcher's song. With a final, anguished howl, it dissolved into the rain-soaked night, leaving behind a silence that thrummed with renewal. As dawn broke over the battered forest, the rain softened to a gentle mist, and the shattered canopy glistened with the promise of new growth. Mara's light pulsed steadily, the heartbeat of the hollow strong once more. She was the root that remembered. And the forest's soul endured. The forest breathed again. After the storm's relentless fury, a fragile calm settled over the hollow. The shattered canopy shimmered with droplets that caught the newborn sunlight, turning the leaves and moss into a kaleidoscope of glistening jewels. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, fresh growth, and a quiet hope that hummed like a living thing beneath the boughs. Mara stood at the heart of the hollow, her essence glowing softly, intertwined with the vibrant pulse of the roots she had woven together. Around her, the watchers stood sentinel, their bark-like faces marked by centuries of quiet strength and solemn duty. The forest's breath was steady now, its slow heartbeat a testament to survival and renewal. For so long, the hollow had been fractured, torn by ancient betrayals, haunted by shadows born of forgotten pain. Yet through it all, the root that remembered had held firm, carrying the stories, the memories, and the light. Mara's gaze drifted upward, through the gaps in the canopy where the sky stretched wide and open. The sun's rays filtered gently, casting dappled patterns that danced like whispers of promise. Somewhere, a bird's song broke the silence, clear and bright, a melody of life reclaiming its place. Beneath her fingers, the roots pulsed with vibrant energy, each one a story reclaimed, a wound healed, a hope rekindled. The forest was no longer merely a place of shadows and sorrow, it was a living tapestry, woven with threads of light and dark, joy and pain, memory and forgetting. The watchers stepped forward, their voices rising in a solemn hymn, a song of remembrance, of mourning, of enduring love for the hollow's soul. Mara joined, her light weaving through the melody, binding the forest's fractured spirit into a whole stronger than before. The hollow's ancient wounds would never fully fade, scars borne with quiet dignity, but they were no longer chains. They were the foundation of something new. As the first leaves of spring unfurled, tender and bright, the forest whispered its thanks, a breath of wind, a shimmer of light, a promise carried on the breeze. Mara felt her essence merge with the roots, the watchers, and the hollow itself. She was not just the root that remembered, she was the heart that beat steady in the dark, the spark that kindled life from shadow. And as the forest stirred awake, vibrant and whole, Mara knew that the journey was never truly over, for memory was eternal, and so was the forest's song. But for now, in the quiet aftermath, there was peace. There was renewal. There was hope. The hollow lived.